Committee on Labor and Regulatory Reform will come to order. Roll call, please.
Senators Naas.
Here.
Wangard.
Here.
Kappenga. Wirch. Ringhan.
The committee is here to focus on the delay in the UI payments and checking on claimant status. Additionally, we probably will have additional hearings as time goes forward, and that's where we are at. Following the agenda, the first individual to testify is Professor Noah Williams, testifying virtually, so we will begin that process. Professor?
Hi, you can hear me? Oh, let me click. There we go. Oh, hi, good morning.
Morning.
So I'm going to talk about a couple of the issues on the agenda, the challenges facing the unemployment insurance program, and I'm going to focus also on the trends and issues surrounding the transition back to work. So I'm going to focus less particularly on some of the DWD issues, which I'm sure other speakers will highlight. So starting in mid-March, the COVID pandemic really hit home in Wisconsin with substantial job loss. So unemployment insurance claims, initial claims for unemployment insurance spiked starting around March 15th. Just again, for some background, there were roughly 40,000 people claiming unemployment insurance at the beginning of March. The unemployment rate was estimated at around 3.4%. Then within a couple of weeks, we had 2 weeks in which we had claims over 110,000. So more than double, nearly triple in a week of the existing unemployment stock. The spike in unemployment claims subsided by early April, or by the end of April rather, but claims remain high. So over the last couple of weeks, unemployment claims have been roughly 30,000 or more, which is a factor of 8 or 9 times the previous level. Because hiring has been low and job search requirements have been waived for unemployment insurance claimants, there's been relatively little hiring, so this has led to an increase in the stock of unemployed workers. So we're seeing continued claims on the order of 320,000. So again, roughly a factor of 8 as to what they were before this crisis started. So again, never in history have we seen such an immense change so rapidly in, again, both scale and speed of changes in unemployment. Just last week, the DWD and the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics released the estimate for unemployment in April in the state, which was 14.6% on a non-seasonally adjusted level, up from 3.4% in May. So an increase of roughly 11 percentage points. Roughly, again, a quadrupling of the unemployment rate. But there are some indications that this was an underestimate. If you look at payroll employment, which is measured in a different survey, measuring employers rather than talking to households, a larger survey tends to be more accurate, particularly at a higher frequency. There was a decline of nearly 15% in payroll employment, an additional roughly 100,000 jobs. So the unemployment rate is probably, in April, was probably significantly more than the estimated 14%, maybe 17, 18%. In the Center for Research on Wisconsin Economy, which I direct, we've been estimating the unemployment rate, and we found that we estimated that in April it was roughly 16.5%. But as unemployment claims have continued to come in at an elevated level and hiring has remained muted, we now estimate that the unemployment rate is over 22%. So again, just think of orders of magnitude. This is roughly 8 times the level which we had previously. So this unemployment has had very uneven impact across industries and locations. The leisure and hospitality sector has been hit the hardest. So this encompasses arts and recreation as well as accommodations and food. So think of the primary employers there being food and beverage and hospitality, hotels and motels. Just last month, in April, 57% of all jobs in this sector were lost in the state. As compared to nationwide for the sector, there was a job loss of 47%. So again, huge impact cross-sectionally. And we also think of regionally where these jobs located. That also has led to substantial variation in the impact of unemployment around the state. So we estimated that 13 out of the 72 counties in Wisconsin had unemployment rates over 20% in April, which were increases of 14 to 19%. So again, these 13 counties had unemployment rates roughly 50% above the statewide average. The hardest hit counties tend to be the poorer ones. So this includes Forest County and Menominee County in particular, the smallest and poorest county in the state. Menominee County has a poverty rate of 26%. And again, it's a small county, so in absolute numbers isn't huge, but they've seen 30% of their labor force file for unemployment over the last 2 months. Moreover, some of the counties in the rural north, which rely on tourism and travel, have been hit the hardest. These also have tended to be counties which had lower average incomes, median incomes, higher poverty rates before the crisis. And they've also had less experience directly with COVID-19 infection. So there's substantial variation across industries and locations, with the general finding being that lower paying industries, so retail, food and beverage, and poorer counties have tended to be hit the hardest during this recession. Wisconsin is, of course, not unique in this experience. We've largely tracked the national averages in terms of increases in unemployment. We've actually had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country going into this. We've seen our unemployment rate hasn't increased as large as rapidly as some others, but we've had one of the largest rates of increase. Moreover, even though initially there was hope that a lot of the job loss would be temporary, that we would have a so-called V-shaped recovery with very rapid job loss followed by rapid recovery. As the crisis has continued, the expectations for a rapid rebound have been tempered. There's now estimates that roughly 40% of the job loss could be permanent, as opposed to expectations of maybe 25% earlier on. So we're expecting to see elevated unemployment rates for a very long time. The Congressional Budget Office projects 15% unemployment for the next 2 quarters and staying in double-digit unemployment rates nationwide until well into next year. So this suggests that we're not going to get back to the low levels of unemployment that we experienced last year and earlier this year anytime soon. Again, if we track the national averages, we would expect to see unemployment rates over 10% for most of the next year before slowly coming down in the future. So all of this suggests that higher unemployment rates are here to stay for the near future. We would expect elevated unemployment claims to go along with that, and that process to continue for a long Talk a little bit about variation across states, and then I'll touch on a couple of policy issues. Again, this hit all states, so Wisconsin is not unique in this process. Pennsylvania was one of the hardest hit states initially. However, they were also very rapid. So there have been complaints across the country about delays in people receiving unemployment benefits. But Pennsylvania rapidly expanded their labor force, Department of Labor Force staff. They hired 900 additional staff members. They were one of the quickest in actually processing the initial claims. Wisconsin again has seen roughly 11% of the labor force now filing for unemployment. In Michigan, it's 20%, Washington, 31%. So again, roughly on average across states, but with significant variations there. There's been estimates that 56% of claims nationwide have not been paid. Again, there's been some reports in the state that it's roughly 2/3 of claims have been paid. So again, that's about on par with national averages. 10 states so far have asked for authority to borrow from the federal government to fund unemployment claims. 35 states did borrow in the Great Recession, including Wisconsin. We borrowed $1.5 billion, but we're not in a position right now where that is going to have to happen in the immediate future. The DWD reported that as of May 6th, the trust fund balance was nearly $1.9 billion. And they also projected that with 300,000 weekly claims, which is about what we've been seeing for the past few weeks, that it would take until October 11th before the trust fund was exhausted. So if claims remain high, the trust fund balance will diminish rapidly, but we're looking at fall into winter, perhaps if claims abate, before the trust fund balance would run out. There have also been substantial changes in the administration of unemployment insurance in Wisconsin. The coverage of workers, or the fraction of workers who are eligible for unemployment insurance. In 2007, roughly 50% of unemployed workers earned unemployment insurance benefits in the state. In 2020, this had fallen to 30%, again, an estimate. So there were changes in eligibility. So, however, during the pandemic and with the temporary changes, that eligibility has expanded. The removal of the 1 week waiting period, the removal of the job search requirement, and also the federal expansion of eligibility criteria, particularly under the PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which is separately administered. So all this suggests, again, we're seeing very high, elevated levels of unemployment, again, roughly average across states, but our rate of increase has been on the high side. We have been one of the slower states to adopt some of the federal changes, the $600 additional bonus. We were, I believe, the last state to roll that out. And again, the claims, there's a number of claims which still remain outstanding. But this is, again, numbers are a little bit hard to come by, but it doesn't seem out of line with national averages, although other states have certainly done better in terms of processing claims as well. Just wanted to mention briefly, part of the discussion was thinking about issues associated with transitioning back to work. Of course, the main impact will be consumers returning to businesses now that we've had reopening across most parts of the state, with some counties still implementing stronger social distancing orders. A lot of the changes now really rely on voluntary change, people returning to businesses, people being willing to resume their economic activity. However, some of the social distancing guidelines that are still in place in counties like Dane County do limit the possibility of substantial rebound. So there's a question, and again, this goes along with the issue of how much of unemployment was temporary. How many restaurants will actually be able to open at a substantial level with being restricted to 25 to 50% occupancy? I know here in Dane County, a number of restaurants are waiting until phase 2 of the reopening plan, where they could have at least 50% occupancy before opening their doors. The recall, the hope was at the outset that a lot of this unemployment would be temporary. Initial estimates, people expected 2/3 to 3/4 of people who were laid off expected that the layoffs were temporary. It's now closer to 50 to 60% are expected to be permanent. Finally, one main issue, which is, again, more on the federal side than on the state side, but interacts with the state unemployment insurance program, has been the $600 top-up in federal unemployment insurance compensation, which was a component of the CARES Act. The $600 per week benefit was set nationwide to roughly target 100% replacement rate, meaning that people, when they were unemployed, could earn the full amount that they earned while on the job. But it turns out that this was an overshot along many dimensions. Currently, at least 40% of workers in Wisconsin would earn more on unemployment than working. And the average worker would get a raise of about 10% on unemployment. Again, this is temporary, right? So these benefits expire at the end of July, but this has also limited the ability of a number of businesses to reopen, to bring back their workforce, and is conflicted as well with some of the guidelines from the federal PPP program, which was designed at keeping workers on payroll. So it's really unclear what's going to happen after July. The House passed a plan which would extend the $600 top-up to January. The White House and the Senate seem opposed to that. In any case, it's unclear right now what's going to happen going forward. There have also been discussions of transitioning out of this, including looking towards subsidized wages directly, basically trying to remove this work incentive, which the $600 top-up entails. One additional feature, which I just want to mention briefly, which has been discussed at the federal level, but actually had been implemented in some state programs in the 1980s and 1990s on a trial basis, was a rehiring bonus. So rather than paying unemployment benefits, this would provide a cash bonus to unemployed workers who did find a job. The most successful of these programs was carried out in Illinois in the 1980s, where, again, $1980, this was, they provided $500 for unemployed workers if they found a job within 11 weeks of filing for unemployment and kept that job for 4 months. And this, in a number of studies later on, was shown to provide a significant incentive and shorten the duration of unemployment substantially. So I just want to mention this as at least one possible statewide, state-level policy reform, which could be considered. There seems to be openness from the administration in experimentation along different dimensions. So something like this, which could remove the work disincentive and provide additional incentives for people to get back to work, is something, again, that the federal government is pursuing, but perhaps state governments should consider as well. So Again, this was, I know a large portion of this hearing was more focused on some of the problems in the implementation of the unemployment insurance benefits system. But I wanted to just provide an outlook or an overview of the levels and the changes in the labor market that we've seen over the last couple of months. So that's the end of my prepared remarks. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Have you, if you look at your data, information that you may have regarding businesses that will not be coming back? I'm aware of a number of them in my area, my Senate district, they're done, including and not just restaurants, a variety of businesses, and some in the farming community, of course. So, do you have any thoughts on or information on that?
Don't have hard numbers on that. There have been a number of different surveys. How long could businesses survive in these type of conditions? And I think, for instance, the WEDC had a survey a while ago, but I think their estimate was roughly 30% of businesses. I think that's actually on the low side compared to nationwide estimates. I've seen more like, in current conditions, 50% of businesses couldn't last an additional 3 months. So again, we don't have hard numbers of exactly how many businesses won't be coming back, but certainly the hopes for a rapid rebound, I think, are rapidly diminishing.
Would we have probably a better picture of that? Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Would we have a better picture of that? Certainly as time goes on, I would expect, but at what point would it be the end of June or the end of July or into August where we would have more firm numbers on the businesses that just went under? I know one restaurant that they decided just to fold it up. They did not want to go into their retirement funds because they were in their 50s and just made that decision. So as we get further downrange, when do you think we might have a clearer picture on how many businesses have just decided to shut their doors forever?
I think a key deadline or a key date to watch would be when the PPP program expires, which is an 8-week program. So again, roughly we would be thinking around July. So there was a huge demand for the PPP, which provided funds to small businesses. The first round, got used up very rapidly. The second round, because businesses have run into problems and there's been unclear guidance as to percentage of the loan amounts would actually be refundable or forgivable. There's been less demand for that. So I think a number of businesses have been able to stay afloat because of this. If those funds run out or when they run out, if this program diminishes, I think that would be a clear inflection point.
Thank you. Questions of the committee members? Senator Kappenga?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your testimony. It's very helpful, especially being a numbers guy. It's impressive with what you put together. Is there any, as we study this, is there any correlation, just thinking through with the longer the stay-at-home order, is there a correlation with the increase in damage to businesses? Like as time went on, where people were locked or safer at home, if we would have opened up earlier, there would have been fewer businesses that were put into kind of a perilous situation. That's kind of what have you done any studies on that?
We've done a couple of things which bear on that. First, what we did find was a lot of the reduction in activity was voluntary, right? Initially, people just cut back on activity before the stay-at-home order was put in place. That doesn't mean that the stay-at-home order didn't have an effect, but it essentially locked activity down at a very low level, right? As the virus or as the situation proceeded, the safer-at-home order most likely had a stronger effect. And so the clearest comparison we've done was looking at Wisconsin versus Georgia. So Georgia was one of the earliest states and most aggressive in reopening. And they've seen a rebound in activity. Again, it's still down substantially year over year, but they've seen a growth relative with, Wisconsin and Georgia followed very similar patterns throughout the crisis and throughout the lockdown periods. They've seen a stronger bounce back than we have. So they've seen growth, relative growth of roughly about 20% compared to us.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Wongard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Professor, thank you so much for the information that you're providing. Over the last couple of months, we have seen all kinds of numbers that have been all over the charts. And, you laugh, and I did too, because it was like, we're looking at numbers that, number one, they weren't being truthful with what was going on with this virus, in China, and all that stuff that was going on, and number of deaths, which, of course, made everybody fearful, even more fearful of what's happening. Okay, so all that being said, as we look at the numbers and we look at how these numbers have been adjusted downward and how, as an example, the CDC was instructing health providers if they had a death, and even if it was a gunshot wound to the chest, but that person tested positive but died of the gunshot wound, it was a COVID death. We had a lot of that happening for whatever reason. And so now we're not really clear, because we're hearing those kinds of stories, what the actual numbers are. How sure are we of the numbers that we're getting here in Wisconsin? And do you feel really comfortable that you're getting good data? And are there things that we can do a better job with to get better data?
So I'm not inside the medical data that well, so I can't really speak to that. The DWD has been helpful in putting out this daily unemployment data, which has been useful in tracking the economy. There was actually some pushback early on, I believe, from the administration on that, the federal administration on that. In terms of overall impact of the virus, that I guess I have less direct knowledge of. But I've certainly seen the revisions and seen the changes that you alluded to. I do think, and again, this it's kind of by the by now, but it's also the case that, as I'd highlighted, a number of the counties which have been hit the hardest economically also have had relatively few cases documented of the virus. So if we're thinking about any type of health economic trade-off, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't necessarily have had any cases, but it seems pretty clear that the economic side has been predominant for a lot of the states.
So my reason I prefaced those numbers was that because they've been out in front of everything, people are so skeptical about anything that they're getting, and this has kind of been on the back burner until all of a sudden you're out of a job and you have 600,000 people applying for back payments that we're behind, and now it's weeks and weeks and weeks and they're not getting a check. So my concern was that our data being in real time being accurate, and so that we are being able to do good projections. Another question that I have was, why are we thinking double digits all the way through the winter and into next year? Are you thinking that we're not going to be able to catch up with where we're at with our backlog, or what are you thinking?
So I think that's part of it, but I also, so the projections, again, take projections with a grain of salt.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, but generally speaking, at least through the early parts of the crisis so far, the projections and models have been too optimistic, right? So people were initially projecting GDP to fall 20% in the second quarter. Now it's probably going to be closer to 40%. But the projections are basically a lot of the employment that we've lost, particularly leisure and hospitality, won't be coming back or won't be coming back anytime soon. So a lot of, and moreover, then there will be some secondary rounds of layoffs. That because of that, there'll be less demand that will filter through. I mean, commercial real estate will probably see a reduction as more people will be working from home for an extended period of time. And again, all of that will feed through. So the hope for, a short shutdown and then quick revival, I do still think we'll see a revival in growth. And again, I think we're off the lows in the state. I think the low point was really right around Easter, mid-April. We've seen rebounds since then. But we're still going to remain at a lower level for an extended period of time. I mean, just think of travel, tourism, hotels, restaurants, all of that. I think it's going to be down for an extended period of time.
So given our, if I can, given our shortage of labor prior to this pandemic and the fact that everybody had for hire signs up in front of the businesses. Of course, now some of those businesses are no longer there. But given those shortages, how do we then make the adjustment for, I heard you say seasonally adjusted numbers. How do you see that as impacting where we're at with our unemployment situation? Because it seems like that's not even going to be a factor anymore. Am I thinking right? Or as big a factor anyway?
I certainly think it's less of a factor. I do still think in some industries, think of like manufacturing, for instance, which has been, a large number of manufacturers were able to still stay in operation throughout this crisis. I think the labor issue would still potentially be important in some sectors, but certainly for services, I think any kind of constraints would be relaxed, meaning it'd be easier to find workers.
Thank you, Professor.
Other questions, Senator? Senator Ringhan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just kind of curious as to whether you have any statistics or even a hunch as to how this might come back and reinfect in the state, since we're opening up now. And we're seeing in a lot of resort areas especially that people are flocking to certain areas. There just happened to be an article in my newspaper this morning about the overflow crowd in Lake Geneva this past weekend. So I'm just curious as to whether you have any projections or are willing to make one. Thank you.
So I've seen a couple of projections. The RAND Institute in California had a study. Again, a lot of these are based on epidemiological models, which have been of, let me just say, varying accuracy. So again, take them with a grain of salt. But I think I've seen a number of projections that we will get a second round of infections in the fall, if not sooner. How large that will be, whether that would come to pass. Again, we haven't really seen spikes in the states which have reopened, Georgia and Florida. There were projections that they would see rises in cases. That hasn't been borne out yet. Perhaps it's too soon. So I think it's certainly a risk. I'm certainly not qualified to make a projection epidemiologically myself.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any of the senators? Thank you for your testimony.
All right, thank you.
Next to testify, Secretary Caleb Frostman. And any of your staff, we've got stations for any that you would want to come forward at any time. So.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of this meeting. We appreciate the chance to be here. This is obviously a timely and important conversation for the state of Wisconsin, and I'm confident the deep concerns shared by me, my staff, and Senator Evers, for those that have worked on their own, shared by the rest of this community and the other members here today.
Thank you.
I need to go over again? Okay. But I'm hopeful we can continue working together to find additional solutions to help those unemployed in our state in the weeks and months to come. And I'd like to start today dovetailing off of Professor Williams' testimony with a recognition of the sobering economic impact of COVID-19 in Wisconsin. For many of your calls, texts, and emails, I know you're getting the same message as we are, which are urgent calls from Wisconsinites who are facing the greatest economic uncertainty of their lifetime. People who are desperate to pay bills, stay current on their rent and mortgage, buy groceries, and pay for medication. And I'll just briefly read a portion of a letter we received last week from Sarah in Madison. I'm scared to death of being evicted. I was sick a few years back and wasn't able to work and lost my previous duplex. I slept in my car almost the entire time, searching for simple things like a shower. It took me almost 2 years to get the apartment I live in now, and if I lose it, there'll be no possibility of ever getting another place in Madison. I'm considered to be in the high-risk category for COVID. I have been hoping and praying every day that somehow I make it through this physically, emotionally, and financially. And that's just one of the thousands of messages that we've received over the course of the last 2 months, and I'm sure in line with the messages you've received as well. And these personal stories weigh heavily on me and my staff, and as difficult as they are to read and to hear, it's important that we do. And to remember that it was people like Sarah in the midst of the Great Depression that Wisconsin became the first state in the nation to implement unemployment insurance. The program was put in place to assist those who are out of work through no fault of their own, recognizing the heavy social cost of unemployment on our families, our businesses, and our well-being. And it's these affected neighbors, friends, and families whose needs drive our work in good times and in bad, and fuel our collective sense of urgency to effectively serve the most vulnerable among us. And before detailing my department's response to the COVID-19 public health emergency, I feel it's important also to briefly articulate the enormity of change, which the professor also touched on over the last 2 months as it relates to unemployment in our state. As the professor mentioned, prior to COVID-19, we were receiving about 45,000 weekly claims per week. The last 7 weeks, we've been averaging around 300,000, which is a six-fold increase in about a month or 6 weeks. And he also mentioned that the month-over-month jump in unemployment from 3% to 14%. And not many Wisconsinites have been alive during a time of higher unemployment in Wisconsin, let alone experienced a month-over-month increase in our state. And it's obvious that we're in uncharted waters and will continue to be as we navigate the impacts of COVID-19 in the weeks and months ahead. As we continue attacking our historic workload, I would like to briefly recognize the work that the team of DWD has done over the course of this pandemic. Their dedication, their patience, selflessness, and endurance has been inspirational to me and to many of the claimants we've served. No one on my 1,400-person team does this work for the prestige, the public appreciation, and certainly not for the money. They do it because their goal is to help people, many of whom are in their hour of greatest need. And nowhere in our department is our core mission of helping people more deeply ingrained than in UI. Helping those who are out of work through no fault of their own stay afloat amid this pandemic is work of the highest order and work that every employee takes to heart. And the hard work has been steadily paying off. Between March 15th and May 10th, 2.4 million weekly claims were filed in Wisconsin. For comparison, 311,000 were filed during that same time last year. Of those 2.4 million weeks claimed, approximately 1.7 million have been paid, representing 72% of all claims. And there's been much misrepresentation regarding the balance of those unpaid claims. I'm happy to clarify the types of weeks that remain in that 28%. Making up that number, 11% have been denied due to ineligibility, and just under 1% are under suspension for previous UI overpayment, which leaves 16% of all claims held, representing our ongoing caseload. This represents 388,000 weekly claims from just over 140,000 claimants, with 230,000 issues requiring adjudication. And it should be noted that while onboarding and interpreting new federal programs and instituting many policy changes, our existing staff's work in determining eligibility on 2+ million weekly claims in 8 weeks represents over 8 months of work in a normal schedule. With increased productivity and an influx of new adjudicators, we anticipate continued consistent reduction in our caseload. While those numbers are compelling, leadership at DWD has fully understood the historic economic implications of COVID-19 since day one. Our planning and strategies to work through and around our agency's constraints of time, enormous volume, antiquated technology, and limited personnel reflect this. At the onset of COVID-19, my number one priority was getting this right. And getting it right meant making my staff work from home ready, ensuring the ongoing integrity of all of our systems, and rapidly staffing up to meet the extraordinary demand. For the ongoing health of my team, that of their families, and for our ability to continue serving the public effectively, it was imperative to get as many of our staff out of our buildings and working remotely as quickly as possible. And due to the tireless work of our IT staff, we were able to make 90% of our workforce work from home available in a matter of 2 weeks. DWD, and especially the UI division, is subject to strict data security protocols and requirements of many agencies, including the IRS, Social Security, and DOA within our state. It was really important for us to find a way to offer that same level of protection to the public and our staff's home networks as we provide in our highly regulated state network. Second, in order to provide effective ongoing customer service, it was essential to stabilize our antiquated IT and telephony systems. Perhaps it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Our call systems were not built to handle 5.8 million calls a week, which is a 20,000% increase over last year's busiest week. The DWD Telecom team, with the help of DOA, spent the last 2 weeks of March enhancing our systems to minimize disruption in our ability to serve claimants on the phone. We increased the capacity of our help center by 200% in 10 days by adding 2 additional session border controllers and performing load balancing. Ordering processes that normally took 1 month were reduced to 28 hours, and we're now able to accept 160 calls per second and have 690 simultaneous calls. While we were still not able to answer every call, we ensured that there is less waiting time and more calls being answered during call center hours. I'm sure, as everyone's heard on this committee and elsewhere, our antiquated, inflexible, 50-year-old COBOL-based benefit system has hamstrung our ability to quickly onboard new changes and programs. Although it was known to be highly problematic coming out of the Great Recession, UI's benefit system is still not modernized. Thankfully, some improvements were made to the customer-facing application system, and our online initial and weekly claims apps and claimant portal have made it possible for us to take more than 2 million weekly claims into our system. And while prioritizing staff and system stability, we began working to address another top challenge, which was limited personnel. We worked quickly to expand our UI team through multiple means. As I shared with the legislature on April 2nd, I transferred a large number of DWD employees into UI in late March and welcomed temporary assignments from other agencies. We have now transferred approximately 150 non-UI DWD employees into UI, representing 17% of our non-UI staff. We continue to coordinate with DOA for additional interagency reassignments, and to date we have started 40 and are hopeful to receive more. In addition to the internal transfers, the department immediately began standing up an HR infrastructure to complete more than 300 external hires in a matter of a few short months. And to date, I'm proud to report that after 1,800 interviews, we have hired more than 190 new employees and will continue our efforts to reach 300. Understanding the need would be greater than what external hires or transfers could deliver, we began in early April soliciting bids for external vendors to assist with claims processing, customer service, and adjudication. And after a thorough vetting process, our first contract was signed on May 7th with Alorica, who is a call center vendor who will have 500 staff on the phones by the end of June. As of today, that vendor has started 100 staff on the phones and is currently training 190 more. Alorica staff began taking calls last week, Wednesday the 20th, which has led to improvements for both claimants and employers and expanded the capacity for existing DWD staff to handle more challenging calls and claims. With the onboarding of our call center vendor, we immediately expanded our call center availability by 2 hours. One of the questions we often get is why call center hours hadn't been expanded sooner or why they haven't expanded longer. And the reason we have to stop accepting calls at a certain time each night is, as you will hear from me a lot today, because of our current benefit system. We need everyone out of the claim system in order to issue payments. Within 10:30 ACH deadline, our team needs adequate time to prepare batch processing for daily payments. And claimant information cannot be added to the system during this batch processing. It's also important to understand that once we stop accepting new calls each evening, our staff still completes hours of work to clear the call queues, process claims, call back claimants, and issue payments ahead of the nightly ACH deadline. We do continue to examine ways to work around our technological limitations and determine how we might be able to extend hours. However, it's also really important to note that the constraining factor for claimant service and claims processing over the past 10 weeks has not been the hours of the call center, but the number of people available to answer calls, service claimants, and process those claims. Stretching out the hours might have spread some of the call volume, but with the same level of personnel, it would have also spread the number of available staff on the phones over any given period, providing no additional relief to claimants. Whether it's answering calls, adjudicating claims, or processing approved claims, it takes people to perform all those tasks. And due to the amount of personally identifiable information UI staff handle, those hires have to pass a rigorous background screening, including for some positions a fingerprinting screening. And in order to provide solid information and solid assistance to claimants, those hires must be trained and trained well, which also takes people and time. And although all suggestions are considered and certainly appreciated, the demand that we expand call center hours immediately would not have addressed the bottleneck of extraordinary claim and call volume nearly as effectively as bringing on additional qualified and well-trained staff, which we have done and we are doing. In addition to the 500-person call center, we have also signed contracts with a vendor who provide 200 adjudicators and 100 claim processors, as well as a call center to specifically help with PUA claims with 40 personnel. And these staff will also, perhaps tangentially, but they'll also help with our call volume because we need bodies and we need minds to address all steps in the process: application, processing, adjudication, and appeals. When claims are paid due to this work, the calls will cease. All told, between external hires, internal transfers, departmental transfers, and the onboarding of new vendors, UI has hired, contracted, or transferred approximately 650 new staff or contractors as part of our 1,300-person hiring effort. As we look to provide the timeliest, most accurate, and most secure service to claimants and employers, these new processes prevent security concerns, technological compatibility issues, and all vendor staff must be trained and pass the same background checks as DWD employees. As we expand our staff and our hours, I hope this committee and the public recognizes that our response to claim and call volume require greater considerations and appropriate due diligence to protect taxpayers, businesses, and claimants. And on top of administering our state UI program, we also have been working to interpret and implement new federal programs, along with several changes to our system. I will briefly summarize these here. Before federal pandemic UI was enacted on March 12th, DOL provided guidance to state programs to grant flexibility and eligibility requirements for those suffering or workers affected by COVID-19. And following that guidance, Governor Evers issued Emergency Order 7 on March 18th to provide relief from mandatory work searches during the public health emergency and expanded eligibility for those not able to work due to quarantine related to COVID-19. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, signed by President Trump on March 18th, provided $1 billion in administrative funding for UI programs. And to secure these funds, DWD was required to ease eligibility requirements and access to unemployment claims, including waiving work search requirements and the waiting week and non-charging employers directly impacted by COVID-19. To this end, we began emergency and permanent rulemaking for DWD 120, which provides notice to separated employees that they may be eligible for UI. We've also promulgated an emergency rule related to DWD 127 and 128 to supplant Emergency Order 7. This rule provides on a temporary basis that a public health emergency constitutes 4 work search actions a week that a claimant files an unemployment insurance claim. This rule also provides criteria for determining when unemployment insurance claimants are available for work during the COVID-19 pandemic. This rule meets the federal requirement to ease UI access and eligibility requirements. And by successfully pursuing administrative emergency rule and statutory changes, Wisconsin was able to secure 2 installments totaling $18.9 million in administrative funding. And on March 27th, President Trump signed the federal stimulus package known as the CARES Act, which created the following 3 programs: Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, which is the emergency increase of $600 a week; Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, also known as PUA, which provides up to 39 weeks of UI benefits to people not normally eligible for UI; and also Pandemic Emergency Employment Compensation, also known as PEUC, which provides an additional 13 weeks of emergency benefits for those who remain unemployed after they've exhausted their benefits. For each of these programs, federal funding was contingent upon entering an agreement with DOL, which I did at the first opportunity on Saturday, March 28th. And the CARES Act also provides federal funds to states to reduce by half the liability of reimbursable employers for their COVID-19 UI claims, full funding for the first week of benefits in states that do not impose a waiting week, and for those that offer short-term compensation, also known as work-share. On April 15th, Governor Evers signed the 2019 Act 185, which made several changes to the state's UI program, which temporarily waived the 1-week waiting period. We implemented the programming and paid out $56 million in retroactive waiting week benefits to over 173,000 claimants beginning on April 21st. Act 185 also made changes to how employers are charged for benefits related to the state's public health emergency for weeks after March 12th and before the end of this year. Rather than charging UI benefits for those weeks, benefits must now be charged to either the balancing account of the UI Trust Fund for claims attributable to contribution employers or to DWD's interest and penalties account for claims attributable to reimbursable employers. Due to DOL's surprising interpretation that reimbursable employers, which include governmental entities, nonprofits, and Native American tribes, must pay their bills in full in order to receive their federal reimbursement, DWD has decided it will not bill the state's portion and is also pursuing an emergency rule, DWD 113, to waive interest and penalties on delayed reimbursements. Finally, Act 185 also made several temporary changes to our work-share program to make it more accessible for employers to utilize in lieu of laying off personnel. Going back to initial comments, unfortunately, these challenges with implementing and administering all these programmatic changes have been compounded by technological constraints. First, it is really difficult to find programmers still in the workforce familiar with COBOL programming. We currently have 16 programmers, including some on loan from agencies and some coming back from retirement. Second, the most prominent constraint of COBOL and what has most affected claimants is that its programming and testing can only be performed in a linear and sequential manner. So that means that testing and onboarding of new programs cannot be done simultaneously, which affects the timing of new state and federal programs. And so far, we have deployed in order of completion the waiting week payments, FPUC, PUA, and we are beginning beginning programming for PEUC. And despite our department's best efforts, the programming has not been without bumps in the road. You may recall that we discovered a coding error the last week of April while we were paying out the retroactive FPUC payments. The Legislative Audit Bureau is in the process of reviewing the misapplied payments and our response, so I'll not go into greater detail today. For this committee's purposes, I wanted you to know that the issues revealed while correcting the mistakes and taking steps to prevent any future ones has led to delays of implementing the outstanding program changes I just mentioned. While none of the programs have been deployed as quickly as anyone would have liked, we are grateful that we have begun paying out PUA last week, have paid out more than $950 million in FPUC payments and $518 in traditional UI since March 15th, providing a lifeline to families in need and communities in pain. We are also grateful that with deliberate planning, strategy, and the appropriate throttling, our system has thus far withstood the load of initial claims and programmatic changes. Also, as I'm sure you're aware, other states have stood up internal and external systems in haste and are seeing very troublesome data breaches, which to date we have successfully avoided. Last week, you may have seen that in Ohio, Illinois, and Colorado, where these states had contracted with Deloitte to build their PUA application portals, applications, social security numbers, and home addresses were exposed to other users. You've also likely heard of the crime rings targeting UI systems that has collected hundreds of millions of dollars in Washington, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Oklahoma, Wyoming, Montana, and Florida. With nearly 1.7 million weeks paid and almost $1.5 billion in benefits distributed, thanks to the diligence of our hardworking staff, we have flagged at this point approximately 1,400 claims as potential fraud, with potential payments estimated to be around $46,000. We will continue to diligently and closely monitor potential fraud in both UI and in PUA. And although nearly all of my remarks today center around managing our reaction to the COVID-19 crisis, please know that we are continuing to work to prepare the workforce and help employers during a period of recovery. Take, for instance, Wisconsin's WorkShare program. At the beginning of March of this year, we had one active plan with 21 participants. Between March 15th and May 25th of this year, through strong messaging and communication efforts, we have seen a dramatic increase with more than 16,000 workers now participating in 413 WorkShare programs. DWD also created a webpage to connect job seekers to in-demand jobs posted on jobcenterofwisconsin.com. While their services are currently available online and by phone, our Job Center staff continue to help people find jobs, apply for work, and connect with training programs. DWD has also applied for and has secured a grant to have our local workforce boards train dislocated workers across the state so they can gain some work experience now and be better prepared for job opportunities in the future. We also continue to meet with employers and workforce partners on how we will train and prepare our workforce for the future economy. We all question what the new normal will look like post-recovery, and we want Wisconsin to be ready for it. So, Mr. Chair and members of this committee, your initial invitation said that you wanted me to brief this committee on the current issues facing the UI program and our response to the COVID-19 health crisis and the historic levels of unemployment. And I assume that you also asked me here today to share the committee's thoughts and solutions, which I'm looking forward to hearing, as we are always seeking continuous improvement and outside perspectives regularly. As such, our team participates in national calls and webinars with other state workforce agencies each week to learn from one another, and we will continue to do that. Unfortunately, thus far, no state has found the silver bullet. We all have our individual strengths and challenges to work through. As I described, here in Wisconsin, we analyzed the situation we were presented with, we developed a plan, and now we've been dutifully executing it since March. It will take some time to see the full results of this executed plan and the decisions we've made along the way. There are always trade-offs and opportunity costs with every decision we make. I, you, and many others will examine DWD's efforts in the months and years ahead with the luxury of hindsight. I'm certain we will all learn lessons we can pass along to inform future officials of what to do and perhaps what not to do. With that in mind, I would feel it irresponsible of me to leave without making asks of you, as members of one of the state bodies controlling the policies and purse strings for Wisconsin's workforce and economic development. So the situation facing us now looks different in future crises. Please, let's invest in our UI systems and infrastructure. One of the most glaring lessons learned coming out of the Great Recession was the desperate need to modernize the unemployment insurance system, yet we're still saddled with one of the most antiquated and inflexible systems in the country. Early in 2019, my team was briefed on the state of the systems and recent modernization efforts. It was immediately apparent that the modernization of the UI system must be a top priority, even in the midst of a low unemployment environment. Last spring, I directed UI to investigate systems in the marketplace and accelerate our modernization efforts. We identified subject matter experts to provide input, and staff took part in feasibility studies with vendor demonstrations between August and October. After analyzing the options and receiving cost estimates in the tens of millions of dollars, we began looking at a multi-year funding options and how to engage the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council and legislatures in ways to fund these proposals. Unfortunately, the effects of COVID-19 hit before we could move forward with any of these options. But whether in times of budget constraints or historically low unemployment, it's never a convenient time to make a large investment in this program. But now we've seen the consequences of deferred action. Let's make sure that our system is prepared for the next time Wisconsinites need to access the economic lifeline of unemployment insurance. And with more people interacting with UI for the first time, trying to buoy themselves, their families, and their local economies, let's permanently repeal the one-week waiting period. The ease and rapidity with which it was suspended underscores the viability of a permanent repeal for all future claimants who need benefit dollars for all weeks they're unemployed. No matter if the rate's 3% or 14%, every claimant deserves their first week of pay. And let's also increase the weekly maximum benefit rate from a paltry $370 a week. As the professor noted, and I'm sure we're all aware, the $600 a week at FPUC ends in July. I don't want to imagine the economic condition of our state if 14% of our workforce didn't have that extra level of economic security. Pandemic or not, I don't know many Wisconsin families that can survive on a minimum or maximum of $370 a week. And let's make UI easier for a person to figure out whether they're eligible. You shouldn't have to scroll dozens of frequently asked questions to figure out whether you should even apply for benefits. The nuances and complexities of this program make it clear why we are receiving the number of calls we do and why so many people feel the system is rigged against them. In closing, I look forward to working closely with this body and other members of the legislature and state agencies to ensure economic stability and progress for all Wisconsinites during this pandemic and after. And I want to assure this committee and the general public that paying every eligible claim in full as soon as possible is our sole and highest aim within UI and DWD. We fully understand this is a challenging time for our state, the country, and the world, especially those who have sacrificed their income in order to save the lives of their neighbors. As we have since March, the team at DWD will continue rising to meet these historical challenges with compassion, with urgency, steadfast dedication, and with the needs of Wisconsin claimants top of mind. We appreciate your time today, and thank you in advance for your continued cooperation in serving the public during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Some of the things looking forward that you mentioned, first we have to get people their checks. It will do no good increasing benefits, eliminating the waiting period if they can't get to the money. You know, when I was in the military, we asked a question: what if? What if? So when we went into any particular operation, if we tried to predict failure, what can we do right now to prevent that failure? So here we sit, and I got to believe that back in February, when this began, and we're looking at the COVID problem, there had to be, I would think yourself, other departments, the governor, of course, his staff, involved in this pre-planning in February. And these questions never, maybe they came up and were set aside, I don't know. And then some of these items get to May from February and pre-planning. I got to believe the question of what if never came up. What if we have thousands and thousands of people coming in? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, it may not happen. Well, it may happen. So I just wanted to preface that with the planning. I've got to believe that earlier in the year, if that didn't happen, then it's shameful. That in this planning process, the what ifs were asked, the COBOL, transferring employees, all of those things, so that there would be, everyone would be ready to roll if the worst came. So let me just say, I've got a couple questions. I've kind of written them out to some extent because we've got people listening in on WisconsinEye, and unlike a regular hearing, it is a regular hearing to some degree, but then they can better understand. So for most of the last 2 months, the call center was operating 7:30 until 3:30 on weekdays, and only recently expanded to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Even though DWD was reporting that Wisconsin citizens were making millions of attempts to the call center and it was only recently that it was extended to 5. You touched on some of that with the batch processing and so forth, but why wouldn't there be more transfer of employees? Get the cavalry coming in. People are hurting out there. It's tearjerkers. When I was unemployed at one time, I know how it is. And when I went in the first time to sign up for unemployment, I saw state employees moving furniture around. I thought, what the heck is going on? Now, that was some time ago, but I get it. I've been there. I get it. It's scary. And especially at that time, I got the money. Fortunately, downrange, found a job with the state, actually, part-time while I went back to school. But anyway, and right now, I guess, and you're the expert, I'm not, I would be looking at ways to pull in more state employees to have the work centers open. If I had to, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would do what I have to do to help these people who have been suffering. Some not, many, not just some, many not getting checks for several months. So I'm curious about that.
Sure. Well, you get the same phone calls, and it's the same. I'm sure we experience the same loss of sleep and the same stress thinking about these cases of folks that are, having extreme difficulties. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the biggest constraint we've faced is people and trying to transfer folks over. And within a number of days, we've transferred, I think, 106 employees into UI, from 90 from DWD and about 15 from state government. And then we've since got 150 DWD employees. It represents about 17% of my non-UI staff. So in order to deliver the core services we need to deliver, we've bootstrapped about as much as we can, getting folks in that area. And we are hopeful to receive more state employees to help fill in those ranks. But as I mentioned, the big constraint and bottleneck for claimant service is having people on the other end of that phone that can answer their questions and help them get their claims processed. And so until that was possible, spreading out the hours would have also spread out that same personnel and not seen an additional bump in claims processed for the folks calling in. So we're really pleased to have this 500-person call center on board and having a significant number of folks trained, which is relieving a lot of pressure and letting our staff do the difficult work of the more complicated claims, answering employer questions, answering claimant questions that are required to call in. So I think, as fast as we can do that, really secure vetting as folks handle PII, and a lot of this work's being done remotely, so the IT concerns, we've worked as fast as we can to get those staff in place to help those claimants on the phones and elsewhere.
Since March 15th through May 16th, there had been about 2.1 million weekly unemployment claims in total. On May 16th, 675,000 weekly unemployment claims were still unpaid. And correct me if any of these numbers updated, I understand that. From mid-April, about a third of the weekly claims, I think you mentioned it was lower than that earlier in your testimony, weekly claims have always been paid, and there has only been slight improvement in ending the backlog. So why is the department not applying more energy and speed in getting all of these claims paid in a timely manner? Real people facing tough times. And on that also, when would you expect that we will be caught up and we'll just move forward as they come in and we're going to be at full operation going smoothly forward?
Sure. I think based on the updated numbers, you're not far off, but about, I think, 670,000 weeks remain unpaid. And it's important to point out the different buckets that those fall in. 11% of the overall numbers have been denied, so those are off the table. So we're looking closer to 83% being determined, and then if less than 1 are on suspension for a previous overpayments, it leaves about 16% of overall claims that are in our normal backlog. And so we have been, that's a big area of focus for us, as are the customer service reps on the phone. Adjudication is definitely one of our bottlenecks, and we're working hard to ramp that up. We've got the external center coming on with 200 adjudicators, which will be fully trained and started by June 29th. They're going to be starting on June 1st. We're also, as part of our external hiring effort, bringing on 100 adjudicators to help work through those claims and do so in a strategic manner, attacking it by date and by issue family to make sure that we can clear large chunks at a time. And our projections thus far, depending on staffing levels, are somewhere between mid-August and early October to get to a place where our normal staff can continue to work on the workload. And of course, that also means that at that point, we're hopeful to have a shorter time frame for the claimants waiting for the weeks, that it wouldn't be, people from March or April that we're servicing in October, but to get back to the point where vendors can be released and the transfers can be sent back to their agencies, depending on staffing levels, would be between August and October.
Wisconsin DWD was, as we heard from Professor Williams, the last state in the nation to start paying the $600 federal unemployment payment. Has the state caught up on the backlog of paying the $600 weekly federal unemployment payment in addition to state benefits?
We have. So we did have that hiccup in late April, but we're able to remedy that and get all FPUC back payments out by early May. So it was, at this point, we've paid $950 million in FPUC, which includes weekly payments and back pay. So it's again, a function of the sequential programming in COBOL, but we certainly, weren't happy to be the 50th state out of 50 with FPUC, but we continue to work hard to deliver PUA last week and work hard on PUC.
And one of the things also I think is important, and if the department is notifying those receiving unemployment comp that they will have to pay taxes on the federal and the state side, so it doesn't come as a surprise to them when they get to their taxes next year. Is that happening?
I think it's on our website and in our frequently asked questions. I'm not sure if it's in our paperwork when folks receive their claims, but we try to make that really well known so folks plan for that.
Because that's an easy one, I think, unless it's right in front of them, to slip through.
Right.
Okay. We recently learned that Wisconsin is still not paying pandemic unemployment assistance, PUA, to individuals not eligible for state unemployment. How is this possible, and why are these mostly self-employed individuals being forgotten? And there is to me it seems there's no urgency from the department to work the 24 hours a day to get these payments done. And you've addressed some of that, if you could do that. And this actually, again, goes back to the middle of March, where I actually know an individual, he's struggling to get through. Some have just quit. And these are, the pandemic unemployment assistance, for those listening in, is a new temporary federal program that provides up to 39 weeks of unemployment benefits to individuals who are not eligible for regular unemployment insurance, such as individuals who are self-employed, certain independent contractors, individuals with limited recent work history, other workers not covered by regular UI. And I don't know if the individual I'm aware of is going to make it or not. They're trying, but a couple months is, the one restaurant, as I mentioned, didn't want to dip into their savings for retirement. So on that, where is that situated? Why is it taking so long?
Sure. Well, we did just start making PUA payments last week, Thursday. So that was May 21st, maybe. But again, the delivery of these federal programs is contingent upon the linear requirements within COBOL. And so as we test programs, and that's one of the lessons learned from FPUC, was we wanted to have additional testing for PUA to make sure we didn't create larger problems or systemic issues for claimants going forward. It was important for us to perform an adequate amount of testing before delivering PUA in order with the waiting week, FPUC, and then PUA. So we're making those payments on a nightly basis at this point. We've had about 80,000+ applicants for PUA, some of which, I think a large number, are duplicative with UI, but we started making PUA payments last week after what we believe to be thorough testing, and there have been no issues thus far with those recipients of PUA.
When would you expect to reopen the basically the full services, the job centers and DWD facilities? Is there a projection on that? That's helpful to those who are unemployed too. Job search questions.
Yeah, good question. So we've are following DOA guidance in terms of reopening our physical centers, but our job centers have still delivered services remotely, either virtually or over the phone, and that's been really vital. We've learned a lot of lessons about what we can do going forward, but also learned the importance of a face-to-face interaction. But you're right that our job center services are helpful to those looking for a new job, but also those that are out of work. And so we've been really grateful to see improvements in our virtual service delivery. But as far as the physical reopening, We're following DOA's guidance on their Badger Bounce Back Plan, and it sounds like we'll be going into phase 1 of that relatively soon. But we'll open those as soon as it's safe.
And I'm just curious, and this gets back to my what if, and I've dealt with, obviously, the unemployed that have contacted the office, and face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball in a number of cases. It gets back to my military experience. When I made rank and moved up the chain, I could have stayed indoors, filled paperwork out. I didn't have to go out on the line, but I did. Because I wanted to know what is going out on the line, what's going on, what problems are out there. If someone comes in and says, we got a problem, and I would know right away, okay, I've done that. I get it. So have you taken calls? I don't expect you to sit there all day, but even for an hour and take calls from the unemployed and hear the stories are agonizing.
They are. I mean, we get tens of messages a day, dozens to our work emails, personal cell phone, work cell phone. They come through and they are agonizing. And I don't want to estimate the average hours of sleep per night, but it's not been many. And probably, you hear weekends, weekdays, nights, phones are ringing off the hook. We try to have, claimants are calling every phone number they can, and it's a really challenging situation. So I think, as I mentioned in the testimony, it's important for us to hear those stories because it drives you, whether it, drives you to a greater sense of urgency or greater stress, but it's important for us to keep hearing that and keep seeing it. As painful as it is to scroll social media sometimes, it's important to read those comments and see those people's stories to fully understand, what they're dealing with and what our work means to them and why the steps we're taking are so important to help address those claims.
I'm glad you came here to testify. I'll readily admit, not trying to be partisan, but with the governor, there doesn't seem to be any urgency. He mentions everyone is going to eventually get their check. It'll get there eventually. I don't know that he has seen the pain. I don't expect you to answer that. I guess I'm just, it really ticks me off that so many of these things would take so long. The stories are agonizing. The farmer who shot 60 of his cows. The people I know personally that have shut their businesses down. And the governor says, well, you'll get your check eventually. Well, that does a lot of good. That does a lot of good. The financial and emotional pain these people go through is frustrating. It drives you to tears, quite frankly. Well, I won't go. Other senators, questions?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Wirtz.
Chair?
Senator Wirtz.
Yes. Thank you for calling on me. Well, let's talk about the Republican responsibility for these problems. Back in 2014, that's 6 years ago, not a couple of months ago or whatever, 6 years ago, there was an audit bureau report talking about the problems of our unemployment comp system. And there were suggestions in there. And let's remember, for the last 10 years, the Republicans have controlled the purse strings. By that, they control the leadership of the legislature. They control the Joint Finance Committee. And yes, they control the Audit Committee. Yet nothing was done for 6 years to update that antiquated technology that we talked about for unemployment compensation. So clearly, remember, the Republicans control how the money is spent in the budget, and they chose not to put the money in to upgrading the unemployment system. Thank you.
Well, what I mentioned about the governor is factual. I appreciate the department head being here today to shed light on it. At least he's out in the open and answering questions, taking criticism. And that's a good thing. And we get that too as senators. You mentioned Senator Wirtz a number of years ago. In 2014, citizens complained about the difficulty of getting UI payments. That's under Scott Walker. And a number of us, many Republicans, including Democrats, criticized Governor Walker at that time I was there. It wasn't pretty, and we criticized them. And right now, Senator, there is silence on the other side. I remember, and I can tell you, Senator Julie Lassa, when someone loses their job as a result of a layoff, they have enough anxiety to handle without having to struggle to get decent service from their government. She was out there, as I am now. Representative Melissa, where is that side now? That was back then, and there was a Republican governor. Representative Melissa Sargent, my friends and neighbors are hurting right now, and they're really frustrated with the help they're not getting from our state. I have another, I won't go on, Dave Hansen, Senator Hansen, Jennifer Schilling, Peter Barca. The criticism that went on, and right now, quite frankly, Senator, your side is silent on the agony that these people are going through. Yeah, it is the Republicans out there demanding action. They're waiting for the cavalry to arrive, and it's slow in coming. And people are in a crisis financially and mentally. So I can go on about this if you would like, and we can go back and forth on it, but it would be nice if there would be a little effort, a little help from the other side, quite frankly.
Mr. Chair, my office is working on a daily basis to help people get their benefits. So talk is cheap, but we're out there helping people get their money. But the problem is the legislature has not put in the money to update a 50-year-old COBOL system. That's the problem.
That's part of the problem, Senator. It is not the total problem, and I'm not going to let you hide behind that one issue. Are there other questions? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Fossman, thank you for your testimony today. I just have a couple of questions about some of the bills that have been passed the last several years, which I want to know from your opinion, are they complicating the process of getting your work done timely? I know a lot of the rules have been changed. I have correspondence here about some of the rule changes that were made over the last several years that slow down the application process or make it more confusing. Can you shed a little light on that?
Sure. I mean, I think we've seen a number of changes over the last 10 or so years that have reduced recipiency rates and have created a lot of confusion, anecdotally, and so that's been a challenge for us. One of the things that we were happy that when we came in, we changed some of the questions to reduce the application process from about 9 clicks to about 2 or 3. But they're absolutely, and even in Professor Williams' discussion about recipiency rates, we've seen them drop pretty significantly, and the amount of confusion. And frankly, the number of FAQs we have to put on our website. As a secretary, I try to read through those things to understand not only the programs, of course, but people's experience. And it is a mountain of information to have to get through to understand if you should even apply and which program you should apply for. And so it's challenging. A lot of the changes that have occurred have made it lower chance of recipiency, but also just far more confusing for claimants to know if they should even apply, let alone get approved.
If I could have a follow-up question,
Sure.
please. Okay, thank you. I know that there were instances in the past where people answered questions erroneously, and it kicked out their application. It put them to the bottom of the barrel, more or less. Has that been cleaned up or enhanced or changed in some way, or is that still one of the major issues that would put people into adjudication versus getting their claims done in a timely manner? Simply because it's a mistake, not that they're being fraudulent.
Right, and we've made a lot of enhancements to try to make it more claimant-friendly, but for that specific question, I might defer to Mark if you know the answer to that one.
Yeah, we have taken a look at the questions to try to simplify them as much as we can. Some of the questions we have to ask, under federal law, but we continue to examine that process. We continue to put out the FAQs. And, I will say, and it's almost like kind of a rumor that's going around that, if you make a mistake on your claim, it's going to be fraud, and then you're going to be penalized. We don't penalize people for making innocent mistakes on claims. I'd just like to make that clear right here and now. That's not something that we do. We work with people if it's a mistake. We work with people. There may be a recovery and payment involved, but it isn't every mistake that certainly is not fraud. So we don't approach it from that standpoint.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
No, I'll go.
Senator Kapinga?
All right. Am I on? Okay, good. All right, well, thank you again, Mr. Chair and Secretary. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. I know it's the hot seat, and I'm going to make sure it stays hot for you.
Great, thank you.
I want to get at this comment that has been alluded to by a specific reporter very recently in a prominent newspaper in the state, blaming the Republicans for the COBOL system and the problems that are taking place. And then Senator Wirtz jumping on board and blaming Republicans for the problems that are taking place, which is frankly a bunch of BS. And so I want to get at exactly what's happening here with the system. So let's talk about COBOL, and I need to understand a little bit better about why we've got people who are sitting here for 8 weeks not getting their check. So this thing processes batches on a nightly basis. Why is the data not getting into the system, though? Because the system is basically saying it's a very simple system. It's actually used by 95% of ATM machines in the world right now. So it's a very prominent system that's still used because it's very durable and dependable. It's not the best, but it functions. You tell it to do these 3 things and it does it, based on the data inputs. I am completely confused as to why somebody who filed for unemployment insurance 8 weeks ago has not had their data put into a batch to be processed by COBOL. Because the systems that are talking to COBOL aren't getting the information in there, it looks like. Those are based on either Java or .NET, so it has nothing to do with COBOL. So I need to understand why person X, who filed their data 8 weeks ago, isn't in the batch yet.
Sure, I can help explain that. I think definitely some confusion there, so we'll walk through the couple different pieces. So the issues with COBOL are in the programming and testing and the timing of how we get our programs on board and the inflexibility of how we can not do things simultaneously. So everything has to be done in a linear, sequential manner. The persons that you're referring to that aren't in the queue and not in the batch are not getting paid because they haven't been approved yet, because there's eligibility determinations that have to be made, which are outside of any IT piece. If people are approved, they're put in the batch and they're paid through our systems. If they've not been paid yet, there are questions about their eligibility. And
Okay, I want you to keep going, but I want to stop, and if I could dictate and highlight what you just said, that's what I need people to understand when they bring up these accusations about the Republicans being the bad guys. Here is, this is not, the backlog is not related to the COBOL processing batch. It's related to other things outside of that.
Well, there are backlogs that are related to COBOL, things like the payments of PUA and things like the payments of FPUC, the things that require our programmers to program new payments, the payments of the waiting week that need to be programmed in. So as changes to the system need to be made, COBOL is very much a constraint, and it does create backlogs. When it comes to the people we're talking about, when it's an 8 or 10 week lag, that's in addition to the work that's being done by people to program these new systems and test them. There's adjudication that needs to occur, and so the immense volume and the enormity of claims requiring adjudication requires more people to do that. So it's not an either or, it's an and regarding backlogs for both UI, PUA, FPUC, PEUC, and other programs.
All right, so very important point here is I don't want to hear another person say it's all the Republicans' fault, Mr. Chair, including members of this committee, that this problem is taking place. That is completely false and not even a reality. So let's talk about the people part of this, because that's pretty important too. So the state has 26,000 approximate employees, and the governor a few weeks ago, I don't have the exact date, said some state employees can stay home, not work, and we're still going to pay you. Do you know, has your boss told you at all about how many of those employees are sitting home working and still getting their paycheck?
I'm not aware of those numbers.
Okay. So I think that might be an important aspect of this, because we have current state employees who are sitting here getting paid not to work, and I think the Wisconsin citizens need to understand that. And we're going out and we're not leveraging and utilizing the employees that we actually have and are paying right now, and we're going out and we're going to hire new employees to do this work, which takes background checks, which takes a lot of other onboarding things that cost taxpayer money. And I'm a little bit frustrated that you don't even know how many people are available in the labor pool to step over, because we know there's a significant number. And I'm going to encourage you to go find that out, because I think it's really important that we take existing state assets that are already being paid and use them to do the work that needs to get done. Let's use them to train. And I understand from a technological standpoint, you've got call volume. And I understand there's going to be phone limitations. But we are working 7 to 3:30 on taking calls. Are we taking calls until 5 now, or are we just doing paperwork from 3:30 to 5?
So we're doing both. So there's hours of work to be done after the new calls. So you stop taking new calls if it's 3:30 or 5. So now we're at 5. You stop taking new calls at 5. You clear out the calls that are in the queue. So those folks could answer 60 to 90 minutes more of phone calls, process those claims that they worked on all day, get them in the system for batch processing. So there's at least an hour, if not more, of work after those claims close every day. And those folks are usually doing pre-work when they come in to prep themselves for that day to make sure they've got adequate capacity to do the work they need to do. So there's hours of work happening before and after the call centers. It's also important, I think, for this committee and the general public to know that there are other people in UI doing important work that help clear claims that aren't on the phones. There are adjudicators, there are accountants, there are IT professionals that do work on nights and weekends and have worked themselves to a state of exhaustion over the last two months to address the workload that we have and to help serve claimants. And although it's easy to look at the 8 or 10 hour schedule of the call center, there was so much more work being done outside of that time frame by those people and by the other 400 folks in UI and the other 1,000 in DWD.
Right, I understand that, but when you look at PA, who pulled in 900 people to do this very quickly, we could have done the same thing. And I think that's where my frustration is, as I'm seeing bankers' hours being put in on the phones, and we could easily and should be having phones open 24/7 and bringing in as many people as we can in to handle those phones. So if we have 100, 200 phones, I don't, again, you do it based on the number of calls per second, I get that, or minute, whatever your measurement is. My point is, people are waiting 7-8 weeks to get a paycheck. And my mother-in-law, who's one of them, says, you know what, Chris, and she calls me every other day, any updates, do you know when this is coming? She's like, I'm not so concerned about myself because I've got a bank account. She's like, but I'm working with other people who deliver for Panera Bread who don't have the money. And she's like, they don't know what they're going to do. So why are people working 7 to 5 p.m. on the phones when we've got people waiting 8 weeks to get a paycheck that they need in order to make ends meet and literally put food on the table? My frustration is we don't have people on the phones taking those calls 24/7 until we get caught back up.
Sure. To my comments earlier, the calls are only a piece of that equation. You can certainly take calls for 24 hours a day, but unless you have the folks to process those claims and to have the capacity to get that backlog or the workload cleared, that's not going to get people paid.
But Mr. Secretary, that is different from people taking the data in the information from. There are lanes in the workflow. I totally understand that. Probably better than most. And that lane of the workflow is going from 7 to maybe 5. I don't even think it's going till 5 of intake. Why do we not have people on the phones? Because I can tell you, there are people out there who have been waiting for 7 weeks who will sit and wait until 3 in the morning to talk to somebody to get their data in so they can get in the queue, but we're not doing that. We should be having people man the phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and do what we got to do to get them in, because we have state employees sitting here getting paid to do nothing. Get them in and tell them you're going to have to work a second shift this week. We'll alternate second and third shifts. We've got to start getting on top of the problem, and it's not the fault of an antiquated system. It's the fault of we're just not managing the resources we have in a better way.
Sure. And I guess we'll just comment also to that. I know that in the prior Great Recession, there were folks that were working additional hours, but our mainframe, due to its antiquated nature, does get shut down for a number of hours a day. I don't know the exact number, it might be 10 or 12. And so people would have to write down information, and there were many errors inputted in the system because the mainframe was not available
to place this information into the system. That's still the case due to the antiquated system going forward. So it continues to be an issue.
I understand that, but the data, the web interfaces are not working on COBOL. That's a back-end system. If there's data being input, it's in the .NET or the Java coding. It's not being input into COBOL. That's probably a batch import that's being done. So again, I want to make sure we're clear here that the data input takes place in a separate system.
Well, your suggestions are well taken. Thank you.
That's it for now.
Senator Weingart? Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, thank you for being here. Can we go back to this 10, 12-hour shutdown on our system? You telling me that they shut the system down to work on the system because it needs to be updated, repaired, fixed 10, 12 hours every day?
And I might have misspoken. I believe it's a fairly sizable time, and
I mean, he used to close our county one down for, a few hours, maybe once every 2 weeks to do some updates and put fixes or bug, whatever you call patches and stuff like that. But because that's very concerning,
Yeah, I might have overestimated that. Niraj, you're welcome real quick. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I can explain.
Please do, because that, I would think that would be absolutely ridiculous. I mean.
So the system is not shut down. The system does back-end processing. So what happens in the workflow, if I were to explain that, in the workflow, and to Senator Kappenga's comment about workflow, yes, the system, the online claims are entered through the web interface by the claimant, and then after that, the claim adjudicators and the claims processors are processing the claims that need to be held. The claims that are auto-processed, that means they have no issues on the claim data, are processed automatically the same night. And the processing happens at the night. After 6 p.m., the processing cycle happens, so that the processing cycle includes, calculation of payments, applying the various rules, and then updating the accounting systems at the back end so that the funds are applied to the right accounts, as well as they are also cross-checked against the employers. So there is a reconciliation that happens, and then the payment files are sent to U.S. Bank for ACH processing before 10:30, so that the files get processed in the national ACH processing the same night, that is around midnight, and the claimants get their paychecks in their bank accounts, depending on national banks or regional banks, the next day or the following day. So the systems are never shut down. Systems are running continuously, and the processing that happens after 6 p.m. Requires, because of the antiquated system, requires the claim entry system to stop. Compare that, I come from Department of Revenue. I was with Department of Revenue, where the antiquated system was completely modernized over the last 10 years, and tax processing just continues. And refunds are processed without having to take this break or anything like that.
So is that the suite system that they put in over there?
No, this was at Department of Revenue.
Yeah, at DOR.
No, Department of Revenue was a vendor-based system. It is called Integrated Tax Processing System by the name WinPass. It's called as WinPass, where I actually was working on modernization of that system. And because it is not COBOL-based, it is completely decoupled system, meaning the intake is completely decoupled than the back-end processing. So that means you can have multiple, work streams or work lanes that you were talking about, Senator Kappenga, actually function simultaneously. And that is a .NET-based system. There is no COBOL in there.
So if we shut down at whatever time, because we're batching now, we're in that batching process. So once we go to batching, it sounds like everything else stops. We can't do anything else with this. Am I following this?
No.
So you could still collect information. You could still have people on the phones. They could be still inputting information, or you could still be receiving online inputs, and people could be looking at those to say, yep, this is good to go. We'll put that in tomorrow's batch. This one's already getting ready to go. We can get that ready to transfer tomorrow. That can't happen?
No, that can happen because the claims the claims processing system, which is an internal system, which is not the external facing web-based system where actually claimants are interacting. This is the internal system, which is a COBOL-based mainframe system where when a claimant calls in with an issue or anything, our claims processors are actually interacting with the system to view the data, to correct the data, to ask questions, and that system is closely, tightly coupled with the batch processing engine.
Okay, so just so I have this correct in my head. So I call in, and I finally, after waiting for hours, get somebody on the phone. They're now in the system looking at my social security number and information that I have in there.
You're right.
Real time.
Real time.
Okay, so if I've submitted an application already, they can see that.
Yep.
In the system.
Yep.
So they'd be talking back and forth with me.
Yep.
Okay, so after 6 o'clock or whenever they shut this down to do the batching, couldn't somebody still call in or no?
They can obviously, phones will be open, but when they call in, the claims adjudicators or the claims processors
Can't get in the system.
they cannot look at the system and make changes simultaneously because that would disrupt the payment calculations then.
That's where the errors came in during the last time, is folks were taking those calls post-batching. So.
Yep, go ask, because I just want to get
I'm
this clear in
sorry.
my head.
If I could,
I just passed it to him
I'm
because he had a quick
stepping
question.
underneath Senator Man here. So there's a couple of things here, I want to make sure people understand, and thank you for jumping up, because I know you don't know the language, that's okay. So the .NET system that's functioning right now, that's really the web interface with the public. That's where a lot of the questions are coming in from what I understand. And that's not you, that's your question. So there's a lot of questions coming in around that. The actual data, so the .NET interface is and essentially downloads automatically into COBOL, correct?
It is
Or is there
batched,
kind
yeah.
of there's a conversion probably?
Correct.
So I think what's important is there if let's say that somebody calls in, let's say that the secretary brings in somebody and there's somebody working at 3 a.m. Is there a system that person can pull up and look at and work with data outside of the COBOL batch processing system? Because we know that's got to be isolated so it can do its job. That's kind of stepping into a different room. But in the meantime, what system is the person who takes the calls working in?
They're working in the mainframe CICS based green screens that, a few years ago we are all used to seeing.
And is
Those
it an
are systems.
offline module that they're working in?
Yeah, they're online. They are directly.
Okay, so it's still functioning.
It is functioning, but it is referring to the data that was inputted by the claimant.
Right.
Initially.
Okay. So they can look at it, they can work on data, but
They
that data change will not take place until the next night where the new batch is processed, correct?
The data change, if the data is changed in the screens while the batches is running, the payment errors will be introduced, and errors in calculations will be introduced. And then incorrect payments, there is a risk of incorrect payments being distributed.
Right. Okay. You can keep going.
Okay, I think I understand that. So we had a system that they were working on called Enables, that they pumped $24 million into, and then they decided they were going to scrap it. Wasn't this the system that was going to fix this system?
That was.
Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm just hearsay.
As long as I got you there, and you know about that.
Yeah, I've hearsay. I'm familiar about what happened, and I've heard about the system, about the issue that was way back in 2008.
Yes.
Yes, it was. Apparently, it didn't work. I don't know. I was not there at DWD at that point of time, but it was what I've heard from whatever notes that I've seen or people have shared that the vendor was not able to deliver. Correctly.
Oversold, underdelivered. Gotcha. Okay, so if I can just ask, I just got a couple more questions. So we're talking August, September, October before we get caught up. I mean, that's just not acceptable. How do we tell people that are 8 or 10 weeks without a check? I mean, I've got people calling my cell phone, like, yeah, yours is probably ringing off the hook, my house phone, my campaign phone even, that's not even hooked up. But the office is going nuts with calls, and they're like, tell me these people, they get on the phone, and it's an hour and a half, 2.5 hours on the phone, and then they get somebody that tells them that, geez, we're too busy, we can't handle your call right now, and they're hung up on it. Now it's like, okay, so now how do I tell somebody about that's happening? I don't know if that's happening from the third-party vendor or it's coming from the UI phone that they're calling into, because there's no way to track that back when you have all those calls coming in, okay? But it's really frustrating for those people on the other end. Like Steve said, I've got people in my district that they're terminating their animals because they can't feed them and feed their families. I mean, this was their life. And so I guess, I'm looking for a little more hope with at least getting us to a point where we're getting caught up on some of these. With the adjudications, as an example, how does a person call in and adjudicate something if they can't get into the system? I mean, because that seems to be kind of a challenge, too, that some of the people that have called my office said, look, I call them, and then they said that they can't tell me. They're going to let me know. So it's pending. And they go in and look online, and it's pending. But they're not getting any feedback as to why it's pending. And so there's they don't know what to do. And to go back to the phone and wait on the phone for another 2 hours and have somebody tell you that they can't give you any information. Can you maybe just explain that process for how does it get there? And I mean, what's the best process or the best way for people to actually figure out where they're at in the process?
Sure.
That their information data is in the system and that they know it's going to come sometime down the road. Because a lot of people that are calling me don't have computers. And, of course, with the libraries and everything else closed, that was a problem, too, we didn't think about. So,
Sure.
Can you look in your crystal ball? Just
I can. There's a lot to unpack
few
here.
thoughts?
Give
I know.
Give me hope. And no, well, I think it's important. I mentioned in the one of the early questions from the chairman. I think the backlog piece. If we're looking at between August and October, it's important that we anticipate being on a much shorter time frame at that point. That we're working on claims that are hopefully 2 or 3, 4 weeks instead of the current backlog. We've made significant progress and we've prioritized claims by date in order to expedite those processes. So that's some hope for us, and that workload getting back to where our team can handle that is a top goal for us. But as far as making sure folks are being able to understand where they're at in the process, whether it's online or elsewhere, with the onboarding of that new call center last week, that opened up our phone lines internally for those specific claimants that have issues requiring resolution. We call them Q3s, and also the employers that need to be just talked to about questions of an employee's departure. And so as we expand capacity everywhere, that helps us on the phones and online get channels for people either to call in, and I know our adjudicators do a fair amount of calling out to get answers as well. I don't know if, Mark, you have other thoughts as far as steps in the process to make, as folks want to find out where they're at. But their claimant portal is usually pretty updated, but if there are other thoughts.
Well, I just want to say this is going to get better. I mean, as we onboard, when we get this call center up, we're going to have 500 people in this call center taking calls, and then we've got another 100 people in there that are going to be processing claims. They're going to be able to go into the system. They are going to be helping people. Some of the others will be answering the questions, and then callers can get also referred over to our help center where we need another level of help for them to get through claims, and we'll be working on that. So it's going to get better. You just can't bring that many people on overnight. Everybody that we bring on has to be trained. Just the people answering the calls in the call center, that's a week of training for just the tier one. Then you go to the next tier, that's 2 weeks of training for those folks. Now we're going to be standing up another call center that's going to be, or a contractor that's going to have adjudicators, 200 people. Well, to train adjudicators, that takes 3 weeks, and that's minimum. So this is going to get better. We have a plan in place. We will be able to handle more calls. We'll be able to adjudicate claims more quickly, and it will be a rolling process so that when we say caught up by October, it means the staff that we have, will be able to take care of all of those claims. But the claims aren't going to be as old either, because again, we're going to be taking care of them as people come on board.
Now, I do hear what you're saying, but it's taken us 2 months to get to where we're at now, and we're 675,000 backlogged, and that's not. It doesn't help the guy that hasn't had a check for 8 weeks. And I'm saying,
Yeah,
I totally get it, but at this point, we should have a lot fewer initial claims. It should now be repeaters that are in the system, right?
Yeah, well,
Yes, no?
Yeah, we are seeing a pretty market decrease in initial
So we're getting
claims.
fewer of those initial ones. So
Right, and we have seen a pretty market decrease in the unpaid weeks that I mentioned earlier with the clarification.
Okay.
It's closer to the 390,000 weeks, which is, we're at 84% resolved. So we continue to work through that, and the earlier months have a much lower rate, and the more recent months have a slightly higher rate that average out to that 16. But to Mark's point, as we continue to bring on more folks, that's going to help bring down that backlog and do it in order, sequence to make sure that those folks get paid sooner.
So are we ready for the extension, the 13-week extension that they're putting in here, that we're going to be able to hit the ground running? It's not going to be another we're behind? I mean, are we ready to get that implemented?
So since we just got PUA on board and tested, we're starting programming for PEUC right now.
Okay.
So we'll work on that.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead. I'm done. Thank you.
Relative, kind of piggybacking.
I'll ask a few more when you get done.
With the time, it's, as far as I'm concerned, even if everything were up and running today, it's too late for a number of people. So the question is, did anybody call Pennsylvania? As we heard from the professor, they put on board, I think it was 900 people. Anybody call Pennsylvania and ask them how they did it?
Sure. We've called other states and have seen other states stand up systems in haste and have massive problems with fraud, with Social Security numbers being distributed, with hundreds of millions of dollars being paid out. So I think it's been our priority to do this right and do it as quickly as humanly possible, but do it in a thorough manner so we protect taxpayers, protect our claimants' information, and protect our businesses. So I think the fact that we're halfway through a 1,300-person hiring effort is a pretty massive undertaking, and we're close to filling those out here and are hopeful to get those folks on board here the next few weeks and continue our process.
I think I may call Pennsylvania myself and ask them if they've had, maybe they have all kinds of problem. I guess I'll find out, because if they've got success out there, I would think we'd be on the phone with them, finding out how'd you do it.
Could I make a comment
Yeah.
just to kind of set the stage a little bit where we were? The unemployment rate in Wisconsin when this started was at 3.1%, 3.4% is where it was. And then in just a matter of a few short weeks, we jumped up to 14%. That has never happened in history. No administration has ever faced anything like that before. And where we were with unemployment insurance was, we get our funding from the federal government. We get a federal grant to operate the program. And with our unemployment rate so low, that federal grant kept dwindling and dwindling. And so we were in a situation where we weren't filling positions, that we had to be really careful about our budget, because we saw federal government cut our grant 10% 2 years in a row. So we were at the bottom in terms of the number of people that we had in UI. Now all of a sudden, in a few short weeks, we go to 14%, and we've got to deal with it when we're at a low point in terms of staffing. We have done everything possible as quickly as possible to bring as many people on as we could. But as we've said, there's an aspect here. You've got to go through a hiring process. You have to do security on people. You have to make sure they have the equipment, training. And depending on the job they do, that training can vary. Standing up a call center, signing contracts. We are doing all that as quickly as possible to get as many people thrown at this problem as possible. Even the other state employees that we hire still have to clear a security check. They still have to get trained when they come to UI. So all of those things have been going on, and frankly, I think we've done a great job in this period of time. Is it as good as we would like? Certainly not, because there are claimants out there who are suffering. I have members of my own family, but we have done, I think, under the circumstances, I think we have done a good job. It's not good enough for a lot of the people who aren't getting benefits, and I feel bad for every one of those people. And it's going to get better. We are going to stand this system up, and we are going to take care of people. And we are in that process.
Well, 8 weeks is unacceptable. If you think that's great, we certainly disagree. And
Senator, I understand it's not enough.
I prefaced my remarks that didn't somebody back in February, I understand where the unemployment was. I get it. We all knew that. But when the governor's going to shut everything down on March 12th with an emergency order, didn't anybody think, what if we jump to 10%? Everybody's going to be shut down. People are going to be laid off. Nobody said, we're just going to go merrily along. What if? It's the what if question. What if we go to 10%? What are we going to do? Can the programs handle it? Do we have enough staff? Do we need to hire more? Do we have to get another agency? Do we have to pull people from other departments? Nobody thought we might go to 10% when we shut the state down? Unbelievable. Senator Weingart?
And this isn't beating anybody up politically, because I don't think this is a political issue. Shouldn't be. This shouldn't be Republican or Democrat. This should be, we got people that need the relief. This isn't a stimulus or a give me. This is people need relief. So we need to do whatever it takes to try to make that happen. We do need integrity in that process. Totally agree, Mark. That has to happen. But I think there's also probably areas that we can triage a little faster. Can I get online at any time of the day or night and do my application for my unemployment? I can, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now I don't have a computer. Can I call in and talk to somebody that can put that in on the other end? Probably not, right? Why don't we do that? Have people that could be call takers that could input that for the people that can't get to a library because they're closed or they don't have a computer, or they're an old fart that just doesn't. They still got the flip phone and they don't understand the process. I mean, and a call that they don't have to wait for 2 hours to talk to somebody on the phone. I mean, it's stuff like that. I think that would, at least they would feel like they're getting into the system and the data, if they're collecting the data, and somebody's asking them those questions, it should be pretty good that they shouldn't miss anything, because they should know that application better than the person that's, filling it in on the other end of the thing, that there'll be less likely to be mistakes in the process. So are we doing stuff like that? Is that happening? I mean, because we could extend that call time, to not necessarily 5:30. Maybe it's after 5:30 or 6 o'clock. It goes to a call taker, and they start taking in information on new applications. I mean, that might be a way to triage some of this, and so it's ready to go data that can get batched. I mean, just a thought.
I appreciate the thought. That's the thought, and I think expanding the call center capacities to have.
I think that would be huge. I think that would get the process moving.
With the staff and making sure we have enough people on it to answer those calls and to triage the more challenging questions back to our more experienced staff is definitely part of the process. And the PUA piece, the call center that we're setting up specifically for the pandemic unemployment assistance, is to help people walk through that process on the phone specifically. So.
Totally get it. I'm done. Thank you.
Other questions? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been reading an awful lot of paperwork the last few days trying to catch up with all this, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but I recall reading somewhere that there was about a 30% cut to the budget of DWD a few years ago. Is that correct? Or did I dream that?
I don't know if you dreamt it. I don't know an exact number of what it looks like. I know we lapsed a fair amount of money due to, I don't know which programs, but due to Act 370 last time around. But I don't know if there's been a big cut of some sort. the senator was asking if there's a 30% cut to our budget in recent years, and I didn't know the answer to it. Go to the microphone.
30% is not a state executive cut. There has been a decrease in UI funding over time due to exactly what Mark mentioned. I don't know specifically how much that decrease in UI funding is.
Okay, well, I was just curious because I know that there have been less people filing claims, so obviously your budget's going to go down because you aren't going to have to require that many people there. But I just recalled reading somewhere that there was a major decrease, and I think you mentioned there was a 20% cut in funding from Fed, 10% a year over the last 2 years. So I mean, that is substantial too. And then just a different question completely. Why can't we pay people when they file? Why do we have to wait to go through all the paperwork?
I think if there are no questions, if someone's eligibility is determined immediately and it goes through accurately, they can be paid within 2 or 3 days. So that happens for a lot of claimants that don't require adjudications, that they can be paid, of course, not immediately, but it can happen really quickly if there are no questions.
Okay, so it's all based on their eligibility questions that have to be reviewed thoroughly.
Well,
Is that
sometimes
part of law that they have to be reviewed?
It is part of federal law that we have to determine full eligibility before we can pay any benefits. But if there are no questions on the front end, those can go through really quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Kapica.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure I point out and kind of what Mark just said. It doesn't matter if let's pretend there was a 30% decrease. Let's pretend there was a 300% increase. Nothing could have set us up to be prepared for this. I will say that. So there's no way. This is the barn is on fire. So it's really that doesn't matter at this point with a large, when you've got, what percent increase do we have in activity?
11% month over month, from 3% to 14%.
Yeah, well, from a percentage-wise, from 3, we're way more. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Decrease in funding by 30%, even if it was the case, this is a larger scale. In relation to that, because I've got to keep the seat hot for the secretary, it's your job, you're not, if we didn't have somebody put in the secretary position, standard day-to-day operations, we don't need a secretary for that. That's handled by deputy secretaries, The secretary's job is, if there's a fire, the secretary's got to figure out how to put it out as quickly as possible. So I just think that when you look at the number of claims that we have outstanding, it's not an acceptable level. And that's my pushback on just the reaction is I just don't feel like we've done enough. And I'm very concerned about it, obviously. So one thing that did come up in this, though, and this comes from the tax professionals who do tax returns for people, one of the concerns they have is even in normal years when they're trying to do tax returns for people, let's say I walk in and I need my tax return done, there's not a real clear system for people who do other people's taxes and help them out to go see what were your UI benefits. This problem that's there is going to be exponentially compounded with what we're dealing with for the 2020 tax year. So if you guys could kind of put that on your chart of, hey, here are the issues we're going to have to deal with down the road, it's going to have to be addressed because it's going to be a massive problem if we don't have something a little bit better. And maybe we think system-wise, is there some way we can get something where people can access their information. I don't know if we're going to send 1099s. Again, I don't know. But I just wanted to bring that up. Has that even come across your thought process yet on your massive chart of issues to deal with?
Sure. I mean, something we have been working on. We've been working with our counterparts at DOR to help with some of the, whether it's for filing taxes, but even for determining eligibility on programs like PUA to help us better understand some of those income pieces. But consider the seed planted for filing, taxes and the complications of that. I've not seen that thus far, but we'll certainly plant that seed.
Well, I know the tax professionals like WICPA, for instance, they would love to work with you guys and try to help figure something out to take some of that burden off because they've got a ton of stuff going on.
That'd be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Wirtz.
Chair, do those tax professionals have to work with 50-year-old computers? Ask that to Capenga.
Actually, nobody on the front line has to work with 50-year-old computers. It's back office, Senator Wirtz. It's only people deep in the bowels of UI who have to deal with that.
Well, the secretary said it was a constraint. I believe the secretary.
Senator Weingart.
Yes. Question for charitable annuitant payments. I had a couple constituents that had worked as poll workers. That's the only income they had. And then they had a quarterly payment that they get for their charitable annuity payment. And apparently that's not exempted for UI when you're dealing with UI stuff.
I don't know the answer. I can follow up with you afterwards. I'm not sure if.
And I'll get you more information,
that'd be
but I
great.
thought, okay, this doesn't make sense. Why? I would think that that would be something that would be an exempt.
Sure. We can look into that.
Okay. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for being here, too.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Very, very helpful.
Sure. Thank you.
Next to testify is Scott Manley from Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and also, and the others will also be Unemployment Advisory Council, DWD.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, or I should say good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Oh, great. This is Scott Manley. I'm Executive Vice President of Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the Senate Committee on Labor today. And I just want to begin by talking about who WMC is. We're the state's largest business trade association. And we've existed for over 100 years now, representing businesses and advocating to make Wisconsin the best place in the nation to do business. And I feel very, very much honored to serve on the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council on the management side of that body. For those who aren't familiar with the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council, it's a 10-member advisory board that consists of 5 members representing employers and 5 members representing workers. And a lot of the unemployment policy that we have both in the Wisconsin statutes and in the Wisconsin Administrative Code is established through that advisory process where representatives from employers and workers work together to build consensus on policy changes. And so I come before the committee today both as an advocate for businesses for WMC and also as an advocate for employers on the Unemployment Advisory Council. And I think really what we're seeing here today with the level of unemployment and economic dislocation that's taken place since March is really something the likes of which I don't think anybody in this workforce has ever seen. I think the only thing that's ever even been comparable, happened 100 years ago with the Great Depression, or at least 90 years ago. And obviously, as has been discussed, it's resulted in massive layoffs and of course, benefit claims that result, virtually overnight benefit claims that no one could have predicted would have happened given the state of what our economy was earlier this year, which was in really pretty good shape before all of this. From our perspective, the delays that workers are experiencing with getting benefits that they are owed is regrettable. The frustration is understandable, and it's, of course, absolutely justified. Employers want a program, an unemployment program that meets the needs of all stakeholders, including workers. Employers fund the benefits. The benefits that are paid to employees are funded with the unemployment taxes that businesses pay. So they have a vested interest in ensuring that benefits are paid out correctly and timely. And I think that, timely is an important piece of this, but correctly is also an important piece. And one of the things that that we're obviously concerned about, and is an interest of the employer community, is that we have program integrity efforts in place to prevent benefit fraud, and that's something that I think is very important. As mentioned, doing the front end work for claims to ensure that a claim is actually payable, and that the benefits that are being asked for are actually earned and owed, is a very important part of the system. And unfortunately, that part of the system in some circumstances does take time. But it doesn't mean that it's not a valuable thing to be doing or a necessary thing to be doing. Because as I said, under both state and federal law, there has to be work done to ensure that a claim that's made is actually lawful and payable. But we're here today because there's been a huge delay that I think nobody wanted, nobody expected. I think from the employer community standpoint, I don't know that there's a simple fix. It's not like we can stop doing fraud detection efforts and so forth. If we did, we'd be out of compliance with federal law. I think from our perspective, the best thing we can do to address this challenge with unemployment benefits and the sort of the massive caseload of benefits is getting businesses back to being operational again and getting workers back on the job. We're experiencing, as has been noted, a huge increase, several 100% increase in claim volume. What we have is a caseload problem right now, and we need to shrink the caseload. The escalating unemployment rate is the new curve that we need to flatten in this state. And the only way to do that is to get back to business and get employees back to work. And we know that we can do that safely. Businesses, Wisconsin employers are committed to doing so safely. They're committed to taking the steps that are necessary to protect the safety of their workers and the well-being of their workers and of their customers. So I think it's appropriate to talk about what we can be doing in the short term to think about, how can we make the claims, the handling of claims, that process better? Are there process improvements that can be made? Are there, strategic investments that can be made? Those are appropriate conversations, to be had. But I think it's also important to realize that really the long-term solution here is that we need to get, more people working again and remove the need for unemployment benefits in the first place. Beyond that, as a representative of the employer side of the council, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has about what's happening, sort of the history of the program. I've been on the Unemployment Advisory Council since 2013, so I have a little bit of historical perspective. Not quite as much as Mr. Ryle, who served on the advisory council with me before becoming the division administrator. But I'd be happy to answer whatever questions the committee may have and provide whatever input you think would be helpful.
I just have two questions. Do you have any? What is your understanding of businesses that have shut down and will not be starting up? Do you have any projection on that?
I don't have anything better to offer the committee than what Professor Williams had said. I think it's too early to know. I know that a lot of our members, even businesses that have been deemed essential, have either shut down or curtailed their hours of operation simply because I'll just use manufacturing as an example. The demand for goods in our economy has, in many sectors, plummeted. And if you don't have orders for goods and you manufacture something and your orders fall off a cliff, you're not going to spend the money to be in business. So I think until we can get, I think getting past PPP is probably going to be a pretty good indicator. Getting past the end of the enhanced $600 benefits is probably, which goes through July 31st. I think, Senator, we just won't know until we get past some of these federal laws or these periods with federal benefits and federal assistance. I think only once we get past that time frame will we really have a good indication or a strong picture of how our economy is going to sort itself back out. What we do know is that there are businesses that will not recover from this and that have already gone out of business, and that's unfortunate. That's regrettable.
One other question, and that is to the job of the Unemployment Advisory Council. Are you aware of any discussions that the council will be looking at the situation that we are now in as far as unemployment comp, and perhaps discussing this and maybe even making recommendations for improvement in the future?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that we'll have those discussions, Senator. We have been aware. I mean, I can tell you, and again, I've been on the council since 2013, and there were some technology advancements that were made in order to move to a largely online claim intake system, which fortunately those investments were made, because if we didn't have that, if we were still having everybody try and call in under the massive caseloads that we've experienced since March, we'd be in a lot worse shape than we are now. And to be clear, I don't think any members of the council would say that we're comfortable with people having to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to get, their claims adjudicated and payments made. So that's something that we'll definitely want to take a look at. To my knowledge, we have never had the department ask for a recommendation for sort of like a massive IT system upgrade of the entire, sort of mainframe system. We know it's old, but I think what we have learned in the past 2 months is that we probably do need to make that change. It sounds like from what Secretary Frostman said, they began looking at it last year. It would be our hope that we could make some type of a recommendation, to improve and modernize the system as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from other senators? Senator Weingart?
Hey, Scott Van here. A quick question. Do you have any idea how many businesses, just kind of spitball this, that you would think in Wisconsin have shuttered their doors? Any thought to that?
And I think it's too early to tell, Senator.
Okay.
The one data point that Professor Williams had, that the estimate is that 40% of workers who are unemployed right now will remain unemployed, is sobering. And you don't get to 40% of the people who are unemployed right now never coming back to their jobs unless that job is gone. And that job isn't always gone because the business shuttered. But I don't think you get to that level unless you see a fairly large amount of businesses closing down.
Okay. When do you think that kind of decision could be intelligently made then? I mean, a couple more months of data, once we're done with total lockdown and we're totally open? I mean, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Senator, for a lot of businesses, what's making the difference between hanging on right now or going out of business is having liquidity. And businesses that have liquidity are staying open, and those that don't have liquidity are unfortunately shuttering. And the businesses that do have liquidity right now do not have a finite or do not have an infinite amount of liquidity. They've got a finite amount of liquidity. And as the economy reopens and revenue comes in, it's going to be, it's going to basically be a calculation of how quickly can they replace revenue for their business. And, for some businesses, they're going to be able to turn right back on, and, the orders for widgets are going to, pick right back up, and they're going to be able to get cranking, and they're going to be fine. But for other businesses, that's not going to be the case. And at some point, their cash reserves and their lines of credit are going to run out, and they're not going to be able to pay the bills, and they're going to have to shut down. And I think we're probably going to have a better picture of how all of that shakes out in 2 to 3 months, maybe 4. Because I think that even businesses that have liquidity, many of them don't have more than 3, 4, 5 months of liquidity because of the nature of their business. Many businesses are in a cash flow business model.
No, I hear you. That's kind of what I was thinking. Thank you.
Senator Ringhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Manley, for your testimony, and I really appreciate your most recent comments. I live in a fairly rural area, and so many of our small businesses are really nervous about reopening because they're afraid that people with the COVID will come in, and they feel that they almost have to escort people through the store because they have to sanitize anything that a customer touches. For instance, in a retail situation. And in restaurant situations, they're only at 25% capacity right now, and that doesn't pay the bills. So there are a lot of issues out there that I agree will be a wait and see issue. And it's very trying for all of us. And that's really what I hear from a lot of my small businesses. It's just the uncertainty of customers coming back in. And the customers are leery that they might touch something in an establishment that will give them the illness. So I'm just glad to hear that you are aware of that and sensitive to the timing of it, because I don't think anybody will know right away. So many businesses are reducing their hours with a wait and see attitude. And so it's coming back very slowly in my district. And we need to acknowledge that and keep an eye on it and see if support is needed because of the minimal startup that they're able to offer. So thank you.
Yeah, and Senator, just as a follow-up to that, there are a lot of different types of businesses in this state, and I'll use manufacturing again as an example of a type of business that typically has workers, but not a lot of retail type customers coming into the facility. But retail type establishments, whether we're talking about a tavern or we're talking about a restaurant or we're talking about a Main Street retailer, those businesses understand that in order to have a successful reopening, they have to instill confidence in their customers, in consumers, that they can safely re-engage in the economy. And they know that, and they appreciate it, and they respect it. And I think that as we continue to reopen, you're going to see businesses going really above and beyond with deep cleanings and sanitization efforts and social distancing efforts in order to make customers feel at ease, because after going for several months without revenue, they're desperate to be successful, and they know that to be successful, they need customers who are confident, who will be willing to come in and sit down at a restaurant or visit a bar or walk into that Main Street business or boutique to purchase something. So I guess as a representative of the business community, what I would tell consumers is please be willing to safely re-engage in the economy, because businesses are committed to making sure you can do it safely, and it's absolutely necessary for people to do it in order for us to have a successful sort of reboot to our economy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for your testimony. And you may have already known, Boeing Aircraft Company announced a permanent layoff of 2,500 employees in a first round. So other states and Wisconsin are going to be deep into this for the near future. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Dennis Deli, if I pronounce that right, if not, apologize. Wisconsin State AFL-CIO speaking next.
All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the committee for the invite to come and give testimony today. Again, my name is Dennis DeLee, Secretary Treasurer of the Wisconsin AFL-CIO. For those that don't know, the Wisconsin AFL-CIO is an association of labor unions and central labor councils from across the state. And we're headquartered out of Milwaukee. I've been fortunate enough and very appreciative of the fact that I've been on the Unemployment Advisory Committee since January of 2019. So quite a bit less history there than Mr. Manley. But I'll give you a few comments based on my experience and what I've been dealing with lately through this pandemic. So again, and a lot of this is going to be repeat, but this pandemic has put tremendous stress on the various components that make up the unemployment insurance program and all the pieces that work to make it effective and efficient. We saw a program that was functioning quite well prior to the emergency order, then experienced a deluge of claims that has now approached 500,000 in a few short months compared to 290,000 for all of 2019. And again, as many have said already, this system was just not built to handle that sort of rapid, dramatic increase in claims. The phone and internet systems were overwhelmed. Shortages of necessary staff to process and adjudicate claims became immediately apparent. And again, the pandemic has many folks filing for unemployment for the first time, and that leads to a lot of confusion on their part and a lot of stress, and they're just not used to what it takes to effectively file a claim, and a lot of frustration on their part. The department has shared with the advisory committee on several occasions their short-term steps that they've been taking, along with long-term plans that were aimed at shoring up the claims processing, including the transfer of employees into the unemployment section, improvements of the website, an updated listing of frequently asked questions, all that would help claimants get through that process a little bit better, and also the updates on hiring and training, additional resources, and then the addition of the call centers. So all things that we're pretty confident as well will help this process. Again, nobody could have prepared or anticipated what the heck this pandemic was going to bring us. Like many of you, I have received countless phone calls from workers that have been dealing with suddenly finding themselves out of work, wondering how they were going to pay the bills, and just a lot of frustration over the whole claims process. And again, many of them filing for the first time after working for years and years and years without ever having to worry about being unemployed. The difficulties with folks getting through on the phone and long delays and oftentimes finding themselves disconnected. I think we've all heard comments on that, but that just adds to that frustration. Probably one of the biggest things is just not knowing what the status of their claim is. They don't know if they've submitted it correctly or not, or it's indicated that it's under review or in process. And again, a lot of that is regrettable, but certainly due to just the extreme volume that department is dealing with. And again, as much as we would like things as worker advocates to be processed real quickly and checks sent out, the very next day, I concur with Mr. Manley that, we need to make sure that things are done correctly, that the program functions with integrity, that claims are not fraudulent, and that's what we need to keep the program going. So, but again, there's obviously plenty of room for improvement, and I'm sure that'll lead to plenty of work and opportunity for our advisory council. Really, some major concerns for a lot of the folks that are in the low-wage service sector of work. These folks have been hammered. These are the folks that are working for many of the small businesses that you're talking about, the taverns, the restaurants, cleaning services, things like that. Oftentimes students that were counting on some of this work for summer employment, they now find themselves out of work and really in a tough spot. So again, there are just countless stories of what people are going through. So again, we're very concerned about this. I don't know if, at least myself, never anticipated that we would be experiencing these rates of unemployment, and the previous speaker talked about initial hopes for a quick bounce back, and I guess that's what I had hoped for. It looks like it's going to obviously carry on much longer. So it's going to impact the trust fund significantly. We've heard the data that tells us that it could run out sometime in the fall, and hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we can we see employment rebound at a quicker rate, and we can avoid some of that. So I'm confident that the steps that the department is taking, the addition of additional resources, addition of the call centers, will help get this volume down to a more acceptable level and help claims get processed in a more real-time fashion. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to address you today, and I would be open for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your testimony. If I'll just add that if we did run out of money, hopefully we will not, and things will be better sooner than we hope, that the state can and has in the past borrowed from the federal government so that people that are receiving unemployment will be able to continue and not have to worry about where the next check's going to come from. Are there questions from members? Senator Wongard.
Hey, Dennis, this is Van here. Just a couple quick questions. You kind of indicated that the major things that you've been hearing that have been issues are status of claim and then long wait times on the phone. Those are the two major ones?
It's that. It's, people get their claim in, they submit their claim, and, they don't hear anything about it for a while. Oftentimes, again, the difficulty just simply getting through, and I couldn't tell you how many people have told me about, the phone problems, and we have been counseled by the department, and I've shared that with anybody that's talked to me, that if at all possible, try to do the online system. That seems to be much more effective in getting through. And on a number of occasions, shortly after getting a call from somebody, I get a call back from them or an email back from them saying that, hey, it came through like the very next day or within a couple of days. So oftentimes it's just I think a matter of where they are in the process. They get to a point where they're just frustrated, and oftentimes they've come through. But there are no shortage of them that have been hanging out there for several weeks. So,
And then just one other question. So do individuals that are members of the AFL-CIO, do you have a way that any type of stopgap that helps these members until they get their unemployment? Is there anything that you guys do for them to kind of help give them some kind of a subsidy until they become whole from the state? I know they used to do something like that, didn't they?
Don't have anything like that.
Did they used to have something like that years ago,
Not
maybe?
that I'm aware of.
Okay,
There may be individual unions that have something, but
okay,
from the AFL-CIO standpoint, we do not.
okay. Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for serving too. Much appreciated.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Wirtz.
let me ask this labor representative, and this is Mr. Manley talked about safety in his presentation. And I recently talked to a first responder who was scared to death. He was, of course, worried about COVID-19, and he was deeply disappointed because the governor had put in presumptive approval for workers' comp in his budget, and the Republicans took it out. And this man was worried and afraid because now they have to go back and prove the exact time when they caught COVID-19 to get workers' comp. Are you aware of that issue?
I am aware of the issue, and I know it's a little bit out of the unemployment realm, but there is actually some national AFL-CIO guidance on the need for legislation like that, so that first responders that are impacted by something like this, that is deemed to be a workman's comp issue. So that is out there and very much needed.
Thank you. And this kind of relates to the pandemic, and like I say, these people are putting their life on the line to help us, and the least they could get is workers' comp protection. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony, Dennis.
Thank you.
Next to testify is Susan Quam, Wisconsin Restaurant Association. And she is present.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Nass and Chairman, for allowing me to come and talk to you today about unemployment insurance and how it's affecting small businesses in Wisconsin. I'm Susan Quam. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Wisconsin Restaurant Association, and I am also a member of the Unemployment Insurance Advisory Council. My role on the council is to represent small businesses. The Wisconsin Restaurant Association we represent 7,000 restaurant locations in the state of Wisconsin, of which about 70% are independent restaurant operators. Another 20% are franchisees of corporate brands, and of those franchisees, I can guarantee you they all consider themselves small businesses too, even though there might be a national brand on the sign outside of their restaurant. So as an industry that has 1 out of 9 employees in this state, we're uniquely a unique representative of the small businesses around the state, considering the number of employees that our industry has and the number of employers we have that are small businesses. I was appointed to the council in late 2018. So on the management side, I am the rookie in the group. So I may not have the same institutional knowledge that Mr. Manley and other members on the management side have had. I do definitely have some unique perspectives to bring to the table today that we have been hearing from small businesses around the state, not just our members of the Restaurant Association, but Obviously, the suppliers that serve them, many of them are small businesses in their hometown communities as well, and how this issue is affecting them as well. As I look through, and a lot of the things I had prepared to say have already been said, so I will send out this document to Mr. Michelson, and he can distribute to the committee so you can see everything. But I'm going to touch on the things that haven't been said or might be just more unique for small businesses today. As I looked at the 4 points that you wanted to have covered in our testimony, the challenges facing the stability of the unemployment insurance program, luckily at least our unemployment insurance fund was close to $2 billion before this happened. We were at a very, very positive level. Employers have been paying into the fund. We had a low unemployment insurance rate, and luckily we were in that spot. We were not in that good a shape when the Great Recession hit, and obviously we know, as you mentioned before, we borrowed from the federal government, and it was much more challenging. And at least our fund was in a better spot, and I think we can all appreciate that has happened. But now I'm getting questions from restaurant operators and the small businesses that serve them saying, what happens? How are we going, who's paying for all of this? How are we going to rebuild that fund once we get through this initial huge wave? Who's going to be paying for that? And I think we have to remember that it is the businesses in the state that have paid into the fund, and it's those businesses that are going to be tasked with rebuilding that fund alongside of rebuilding their businesses. And that is going to be a significant challenge, I believe, for especially the small businesses that run on teeny tiny margins, that are barely hanging on right now, and hopefully will make it through this summer and continue to thrive into the fall and into the holidays. But many of those businesses won't make it. And it may not be that they're going to close now. I mean, we're hearing now from the restaurant side of things and some of our suppliers again that they just are going to throw in the towel and not reopen, even though they are allowed to right now. And some of these are pretty long-term, prominent restaurants in this state that have tremendous histories. But because of the way this virus hit and the shutdown hit in our state and hit our industry, when you run on those small profit margins, having no cash flow or even a small cash flow from carryout isn't enough to sustain you to even have enough money to buy the food to open your doors. So we feel that we're looking at, based on the research that we have conducted with the National Restaurant Association, even with opening up our doors at the 50% level, we may lose 25% of the restaurants in this state. Restaurant eating and drinking places, if you want to look at the labor statistic way of referring to us. That is pretty substantial loss of business. And I hope it's not true, but we'll have to see how we can rebuild consumer confidence and get consumers back into our operations and into the small mainstream businesses so that they can try to generate that revenue. But again, looking at the long-term or challenges UI will face, I think that's one that we on the advisory council will have to also address is, as we go back and we go through, how the different schedules are triggered based on the level of the fund, who's going to be the ones that are going to have to pay that additional dollars in. And that is going to be predominantly hitting small businesses pretty hard just as they're trying to ramp back up. On the difficulties encountered by citizens applying for and receiving the benefits, like everyone, we received a lot of calls. Our industry was, we feel, the hardest hit by the hospitality industry, was the hardest hit by the closure of businesses and the mass layoffs and furloughs that had to happen. And so we've taken thousands and thousands of phone calls, as well as calling out to our members. But it's not just the employees calling us, it was the employers, because they felt so horrible that they had to lay off some of their valued team members. They wanted to make sure that they could get them on unemployment as soon as possible. And of course, sometimes they would run into the same issues that were brought up before. they are hard phone calls to take, and all of you have taken them too. The struggle was real, and it was painful to listen to the stories and what happened, and the mental, how folks were feeling, about that. And it was hard on our team to have to take those calls. And we're a service organization, that's our job. But you don't, after call after call after call of employees struggling and trying to figure out what to do. We even had one of our team members sit on the phone for 3 hours with a member's employee, trying to help them manage what they were doing, and get through. And they finally did get through and get it done. But it took 2 or 3 tries on the phone system because they kept on getting kicked out. So the struggle out there was real, and it was difficult. We also took a lot of calls from HR professionals in our industry, who are either they work for payroll programs or they are directly work for an organization large enough to have its own HR professional on staff. And many times they were asking us questions because they couldn't navigate their way through the FAQs that are on the department's website. Now, someone who's, kind of drank the Kool-Aid and taken a bath in UI issues, I can understand what is on a lot of those FAQs, but we had HR professionals who weren't even though they're in HR, they're not necessarily experts in unemployment insurance, and they struggled through those FAQs. So there's one thing that, we hope the department will take a look at and try to put those in more layman's terms for people who maybe don't understand UI whatsoever. We have seen our call volume go down, our questions from people going down. I think a lot of people in our industry who applied have been able to take advantage of it and receive their back, FPUC payments and the other type, and their regular UI payments. But we also know, based on our research, that there's a huge number of employees who applied, got completely frustrated, and are not going, and have just completely dropped out of the system. They're just not going, even though they're owed unemployment insurance, they could use the money to pay their bills, and not lose their apartments or all of the other types of problems you have when you don't pay your bills. But they've just given up. They've just mentally felt that they just can't do it, and they're hoping against hope that they get called back by their employer so that they can just start working again. And I don't know if that's unique to our industry because of the transient nature of a lot of our hourly employees, but it's definitely a problem that we're seeing. As far as the department's response to the issues, we know they were hit pretty hard very, very quickly, and we totally understand that. We all wish we could have worked through this backlog a lot faster. I totally understand and believe in the professionalism of the folks that work at the department, and I have faith that they can work their way through this. But as mentioned before, we haven't had a chance to have a lot of discussion on this. We haven't met face-to-face since before, the shutdown of businesses and government. So it's very difficult to have these kinds of conversations via phone or Skype. So hopefully we will be able to meet soon so that we can have discussions as a council on these issues. And then finally, on some trends and upcoming issues that we're going to see. Totally agree with what Mr. Manley said earlier. Time will tell as to where we're going to be at with how businesses are going to be able to reopen and how we are going to be able to pull people back into the workforce, hopefully for the people they were working for before they were laid off or furloughed, or transitioning them to other jobs. But here's what I'm hearing from mostly restaurant operators as they are trying to safely reopen before, and regain consumer confidence and protect their employees as they come back to work. In many parts of the state, most restaurants, if they are reopening at that 50% capacity, not necessarily because it's mandated by their local governments. It's more about that is what the recommendation is at the federal level. That is what our recommendations as an industry is at, that you open at a level that you can have tables be safely distanced and follow all of the appropriate guidelines for employee health, PPE, and cleaning and sanitizing in the operation. So 50% is about where our most operations can be at, and I think Main Street businesses are about that same as well. So what we're hearing as people are trying to reopen, and it's like two ends of the spectrum. One, they are trying to recall their furloughed employees back, but because of the FPUC $600 a week federal benefit, a lot of these employees wish to remain on UI. This forces employers to report those employees to DWD as turning down work, and in these cases, I'm not talking about employees who have legitimate excuses like their children are at home because they can't be in school and they have nowhere for those kids, no one to be able to watch those kids, but folks that don't have a legitimate reason for not returning, and they're making up to $22 an hour being able to be at home not working. And that is that's a strong deterrent for some people to go back to work. The second problem is on the opposite spectrum. Because reopened businesses are going to be at 50%, they don't have the traffic to justify bringing back every one of their employees. They don't have the work for them to do. So they're not able to bring everybody back. And they have to pick, who are the employees that I'm going to be bringing back to my business. And not only does this leave more people in UI, kind of like talking before about now how we're, at least 40% of the people might remain on UI, it also opens the businesses up to potential lawsuits from their own former employees, because some employee who wanted to go back to work and wasn't brought back could feel that they were discriminated against in some manner in the recall process. And both of these issues are just no-win situations for the small businesses that are out there. We feel that there's a long road ahead for small businesses in the next 1 to 2 years as we try to transition people off of UI. It is going to take a long time for businesses to get to the new normal. We believe as I said before, we'll have a lot of operations open up this summer. They will try to make it through the summer, and then come fall, when what tourism we are going to get in the state starts to tail off, they're not going to see enough local cash flow from local patrons. They're going to be forced to close their doors in the fall. Again, putting more people back on unemployment insurance. And you'll also see these former business owners themselves out job hunting in addition to their former employees. And what we also are seeing as we look at transitioning maybe some people to different jobs. In our industry, I'm going to use our front of the house servers as an example. Our front of the house servers in Wisconsin average $18 to $30 an hour, including tips and wages in the state. So it's a pretty good for especially most of these are part-time jobs. This is a very good way to earn money if you were looking for a part-time job, because it fits the needs of your family. And you're the spouse that has a part-time job. Being a server or a bartender, as an example, is a great way to accommodate those hours that you have. Obviously, if you're in school, it's another great way. How many of us all worked in the industry to put our way through school? So what happens when those jobs aren't there for those people who need flexible jobs that are going to pay them on average $25 an hour to work? What jobs are going to be out there in this new economy that's going to replace our restaurant-related jobs that are for those front-of-the-house employees? Warehouses, call centers, retail stores. I'm looking at who offers flexible hourly positions, and there's not a lot out there that I see emerging in this new economy. But maybe I just have blinders on because we want those people to stay working in our industry, and we want our industry to thrive. But I'm very concerned about where are we going to see those folks, and what kind of jobs are we going to have for them that pays them what they are used to being paid and gives them the flexibility that they have. So we don't have all of the answers yet to get everybody gainfully employed at the level they were prior to this pandemic, but hopefully the small businesses are able to recover and thrive and do our share to get those people back to work.
Thank you for your testimony. I have just two comments. I listened to a national program within the last week. Interesting, the individual on there talking about those on unemployment and the extra $600 and not going back. One of the things he said was that some will be very, very sorry they did not take the job, because by the time they wait until the end of July, their jobs, a number of them, are going to be filled by others who did come back. And they will think, well, they've got the extra $600 going through July, and then they'll just go back to work. Mm-hmm. They will be fooled when they won't be able to go back to work because their job has already been filled. And secondly, for those who are on the sidelines out of frustration, clearly that's unfortunate. I think legislators and also the Restaurant Association and other organizations can remind them as we go forward, and the system gets better at taking care of the intake, to go back and get the money that you deserve, or you can leave it with government. I would say go back and get it. And we can remind them that things are better. You won't be as frustrated as you were in May or even back in April. Go back and get what you are owed. Questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Wirch.
Yes. First of all, thank you for your testimony. It was very good. My question is this, and you mentioned several times a cash flow problem, and of course that happens with small business. Do you foresee then bigger business or restaurant chains taking bigger market share because they have the cash flow?
Not necessarily. I will tell you that every type of restaurant business during the last few months has had a cash flow issue, regardless of their size. You could be, and especially since the majority of the larger multi-units you're referring to are a franchisee system, the corporate offices don't own the restaurants. Those are owned locally by small businesses. So I would say overall there's a cash flow issue at every level. I was reading an article yesterday that was trying to name the top 6 multi-units that actually do own their restaurants in every location that they think might be out of business by the end of the year, or at least filing for some form of bankruptcy protection. Now, I don't know how accurate that was, but believe me, it's not just the small businesses. But I would say that the heart and soul of the restaurant industry in Wisconsin is obviously the independent and small franchisee owners.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next to testify, and the final person is Terry Hayden, Wisconsin Pipe Trades Association, also from the Unemployment Advisory Council. Welcome, Terry.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Are you able to hear me?
Somewhat.
Okay.
There we go. Now you're good now.
All right. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Chairman Noss, members of the Senate, I want to thank you for the opportunity to apply today, the invitation. My name is Terry Hayden, and as was said, I serve as the president of the Wisconsin Pipe Trades Association. I also have the honor of serving with the previous 3 speakers, Susan, Dennis, and Scott, as well as the other members of the Unemployment Advisory Council, and I've been on the council since 2020. I will speak primarily from my role as a member of the Unemployment Council, and will attempt to confine my comments to my knowledge base, what the committee is focused on today. The first item was being the challenges facing the stability of the UI. As I mentioned, prior to my first meeting as a council member, I met with the division director at that time, who briefed me on the council and its activities. One specific point that he emphasized during the meeting was the stability of our UI trust fund. All the thresholds and triggers for the tax tables not kept up with wage inflation. And at the time report for the council dated April 2014 that the issue, and I think it was referred to also by Mr. Manley and Home also, that ultimately it's the employers that are paying into that fund, but it's obviously in our interest to have a stable fund. As that's so with that, those same deficiencies that are in the report remain today. And as a council, we have had multiple discussions about them, but there really hasn't been an urgency to change, as masked by our strong economy, record low unemployment, and also somewhat offset by the reduced number of people who qualify for UI benefits due to prior legislative action. With the COVID-19 pandemic changing the unemployment numbers in our state, and with those numbers and those changes likely to be lasting, balance in our UI trust fund will be greatly impacted, and I believe it's time that we revisit the proper balance for our UI tax schedules and matching them to current wage levels. The next item was significant difficulties that are being encountered by citizens. I'm certainly very concerned about the hardships and delays that Wisconsin citizens are experiencing and receiving. I'm sympathetic and certainly understand that the people are depending upon that money to survive, not just thrive, but survive. I fielded some questions, but on the front line are our business reps around the state, and they're fielding countless questions, and I've helped them to answer the questions and from my experience on the council level. As a council member, I also do understand that it's the UI divisions that it has a legal obligation to prevent fraud and to protect program integrity. And because of this, they simply can't cut checks to everybody that applies through the online portal. But the reality is, and thankfully, that the majority of the people who apply for their benefits through the UI portal are able to receive those benefits without the need to speak. Unfortunately, it's all of those others that we're talking about today who need to have their claims adjudicated to determine their eligibility and benefits. When you have a UI division that's right-sized for normal times, it's difficult to expect, as badly as we want it to, it's difficult for us to expect it to keep up when approximately 2 million people file claims in a little more than. As far as the departments and divisions' response, because I do not work in the UI division, and it's not an area of expertise for me, I'll comment what I do know and also what I've heard, and some of it was in testimony today. The UI division is typically staffed by approximately 500 employees through transfer, contracting with outside vendors. That number could reach up to 1,700 people. Now, unfortunately, as we heard, the backlog of adjudication won't be eliminated immediately because of the need to train individuals, but certainly the progress should be there to pay out benefits. Our need to invest in technology within the UI division. Apparently, programming limitations of the current system caused delays and made it difficult to implement extended benefit provisions from the CARES Act. However, as we know, investments in technology require additional state funding. The technology does exist for fraud, waste, and abuse, contracting for call centers and adjudicators, and for additional services, but we all have to be willing to make that investment to do so. Budgets are tough. I do know on a personal level from conversations at my local Elks Lodge, a member of our lodge, his spouse works in the UI division, and know that she was working extended days and Saturdays to help process claims for within the department. So I know that the existing staff was indeed engaged in trying to eliminate that. As far as trends and upcoming issues, the COVID pandemic is the worst crisis that I've experienced in my working career and in my lifetime. Nearly all Americans have died because of this virus. And until people are safe and feel safe, our economy is going to continue to. UI benefits are temporary. Absent of any federal increase or extension, they're only $370 a week for a maximum of 26. Bottom line, people in Wisconsin need to work. And to that end, I believe the majority of Wisconsin employers have already taken the first steps and even further steps by implementing protocols to protect their employees, protect their customers, so that they can safely return to work and to their place of business. An example of that is the Wisconsin Pipe Trade, working here with our Contractors Association statewide, put together a job site protocol for all of our employers to follow, and our members and their families are safer because of the safety measures that our employers are taking. And so, with that, we're in a place where we have a lot of uncertainty in our economy and a lot of uncertainty in our industry, in all industries in the state. But with that, we still have people that do leave the workplace due to aging and retirement. So regardless, we're not going to stop recruiting and training the next generation of tradespeople in our mechanical construction industry. But we are certainly having to adjust to how that is done and the efforts in this new environment. And once again, as a reminder, we do that without any governmental assistance. It's to our members and our employers. In closing, in the absence of a vaccine or the ability to contain the virus somehow, things simply will not return to the way they were before this crisis began. Ultimately, and I don't think any of us have all the answers, but collectively, business, labor, and government will need to work together to protect our citizens and to create new job opportunities and ultimately rebuild our economy. So I'll close my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Terry. Are there questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much for your insight and for your willingness to participate today. Thank you. Oh, wait, we have one. Senator Wongard.
Hey, Terry, this is Van Wongard. Just one question. From the pipe fitter side, construction being an essential business to be involved in, did we see a lot of layoffs from that side of the issue for the pipe fitters, or still pretty much out there working?
On the construction side of the industry, there were some delays. There was some slowdown and some managing of size of crews based upon, separating employees, keeping proper distances. So with that, there was some layoffs. Where we really saw, a larger portion of layoffs was on the service side of our industry, the mechanical service, whether it be fire protection, refrigeration, air conditioning. With the numbers being, closing down, suspending operations or reducing their operations, a lot of our service staff were also laid off or working limited hours during that time period. So as a whole, the majority of our members continued to work and have not been directly impacted themselves, but a measurable number, and I don't have an accurate number to give you, were unemployed and had to file for benefits.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That is the final individual to speak, and that concludes the hearing. Thank you for your attendance.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civic broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.
Hi, I'm John Henkes, President of WisconsinEye Public Affairs Network, and I'm speaking to you today to ask for your financial support. For 14 years, WisconsinEye has provided uninterrupted, gavel-to-gavel live coverage from our state capitol, the legislature, the Supreme Court, the governor's office. We're proud to continue to do that and continue through this time of crisis with important coverage. We are 100% committed to bringing these important meetings into your home or place of work. We've created online pathways that allow us to connect you live with these important events. But WisconsinEye needs your help to do so. At this time, we are facing unprecedented staffing, technical, and financial challenge. So if you rely on our coverage to stay informed on issues you care and need to know about, I ask that you consider a one-time charitable gift today to help us through this challenge. Whether you're following the DHS briefings, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, or leadership briefings from the state capitol, or any of the timely interviews conducted by our senior producer, Steve Walters, we could use your support today. If just a fraction of the thousands who value WisconsinEye coverage say yes with a gift of any size, it will provide a huge boost. So thank you. To donate, please text WisEye to 44321. That's WISEYE to 44321, or visit wiseye.org/donate. WISEYE.org/donate. Or you could send a check to 122 West Washington Avenue, Suite 200, Madison, Wisconsin, 53703. Again, thank you so much. Please be safe. Stay optimistic. We are Wisconsin.